Whoops, I don't want to leave the meeting. The second public hearing of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I am, as always, your friendly chairman, Kumar Barve. I'm joined by the Vice Chairman, Dana Stein, and the members of our committee. The bills are going to be heard in the following order. First, House Bill 26, Delegate Holmes. Second, House Bill 42, Delegate Lasanti. Third, House Bill 81, Delegate OBrien. House Bill 86 and 117 will be 4 and 5. They're both sponsored by Delegate Von Stewart. And then House Bill 101, Delegate Rosenberg, House Bill 134, Delegate Hill, and House Bill 174, Delegate Lehman will be the last bill that we will be considering this afternoon. And just, I know I always try to have this as a point of reference. We have 49 witnesses today on our public hearing. So with all that said, I'm going to give the floor over to Delegate Holmes. You have 4 minutes to introduce House Bill 26, House Bill 26.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Marvin Holmes. And before you today is HB 26. And this bill may sound familiar to some of my committee members. The bill is entitled Real Property Regulation of Common Ownership Community Managers. And the reason why this probably sounds familiar to you is because this bill has been offered in 2013, 2014, 2017, 2018. It passed the House in 2020 and it passed the House in 2021. Obviously, I refuse to give up on a good idea. This bill is relevant to the licensure of managers, or more precisely, persons who manage common ownership communities. Now, you're going to hear witnesses testifying that this is probably not a good idea, but I am hopeful that with my testimony and the testimony of others, including the Attorney General's office and some citizens who have encountered multiple problems, that you will be convinced otherwise, as you have in 2020 and 2021. Perhaps we can have this same message sent over to the Senate side so they can allow it to be released, or at least get a vote. At least get a vote on the judiciary side, on the Senate side.
So this is a JPR is where it's stuck?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Now, sometimes persons ask about community managers and their licensure requirements, or how many of them are there. I'm going to open up my testimony the same way I opened up my testimony on this bill in 2013, 2014, 2017, 2018, 2020, and 2021. How many community managers are there in the state of Maryland? We don't know. Have no idea. Also, as indicated in 2013, 14, 17, 18, 20, and 21, what are the qualifications to be a community manager in the state of Maryland? Well, that answer is pretty easy to obtain. In the state of Maryland, all one needs to do to be a community manager is to go to Staples and get a business card that says, I'm a community manager. Pretty simple. The only thing we need in the state of Maryland for you to be a community manager is to go to Staples and say, my business card says I'm a community manager. To me, that sounds to be a little bit ridiculous, considering the fact that the community managers are responsible for millions, plural, of dollars for community associations throughout the state of Maryland. In this bill, HB 22, I am requesting, I'm sorry, that's not true. I am requiring that those persons who have gone to Staples must now take training, pass some exams, and be responsible for their actions. And Mr. Chair, I see that I have 20, 19, 18, 17 seconds left. I think that what I have provided for you is enough for us to yield a yay vote again, like we did in 2020 and 2021 for this bill, HB 26. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will yield back to the floor.
Okay. The first person up to testify is Karen Strawn with the Consumer Protection Division of the Office of the Attorney General. Karen, welcome back to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Karen Strawn, and I'm here on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General in the Consumer Protection Division. Thank you, members of the committee and Chairman Barbe and Vice Chair Stein for having me come and testify, allowing me to. This bill is a very important bill. It's been in a number of years, and it's set up to ensure the education, licensing, and regulation of common ownership community managers. The reason this is so important is you've all heard of stories in which there have been common ownership community managers who have not done what they need to do and who have ended up taking and misappropriating money from community organizations. You've heard the stories of legacy that harmed a tremendous number of organizations. In addition, as noted in my written testimony, we took action against another property management company in 2017 because they were misappropriating funds. There's a lot more that property managers do that can cause harm to an association. And right now, it's difficult to be able to take action against property managers for these harms that they're committing. I've been to meetings where a property manager is running a meeting and does not believe that the Office of the Attorney General has any right to be there or any right to be able to speak to them when they are doing something that's incorrect and against the condominium laws. For these reasons, we think it's important that this bill be passed so that we can regulate common ownership community managers and ensure that they are acting in the best interest of the condominiums, homeowners, and co-op associations that they manage. So for these reasons, we ask for a favorable report on HB 26.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll hear all the proponents and then we'll go to questions. So definitely put your hands up in the Zoom system. Next, Bill Castelli with the Maryland Retailers. Bill, welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Happy New Year. Bill Castelli with the Maryland Realtors. We're a 30,000 member association of real estate licensees and brokers across the state. I will be very short since you have heard this bill and have supported it 2 years in a row, but we do support this bill. We think it makes sense for community managers to be licensed. Over 1 million people in the state of Maryland are living in community managed associations, HOAs, condos. So we think it makes sense that these managers at least have some training, basic knowledge when they're doing their job for those communities. We occasionally will have complaints, from a buyer who's trying to get a resale package or something from an association. In terms of what's being charged, sometimes just access to the basic information that a buyer needs in order to complete that sale. And right now, the only kind of backstop that a consumer has would be the Attorney General's office, and we do refer things to Karen occasionally if we see something that doesn't appear to be in compliance with the law, or in Prince George's County, Montgomery County, they do have commissions there that would help. But we think this bill makes sense, and we would encourage a favorable report.
All righty then, thank you very much. Let's now go to Kim Glaude, who's with the Harfordtown Homeowners Association. Kim, welcome back to the committee. You have 2 minutes. Kim, are you there?
Yes, hi. Apologize.
Okay,
I have to find my unmute button.
That's okay.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to testify on behalf of Delegate Holmes, Bill HB 0026. I am a member of the Harfordtown community located in Harford County, Maryland. At the present time, we don't have a bill of such, and it's needed for the whole state. My community has been a victim of mismanagement of HOA funds and mismanagement by management companies. I'm in favor of this bill because it's important that property management companies be licensed and held accountable for transparency. Too many times there have been instances of mismanagement, misguidance, misappropriation of HOA funds, incorrect contract negotiations, and failed community projects by contractors hired for the association by the property management company. All other businesses have licenses, so why not property management companies? No one knows how much training these property management companies have in reference to managing HOA communities. Many property management companies that represent communities have failed to provide upkeep of common areas and enforcement of the bylaws and CCRs that govern a community. Most homeowners serving on the board are unfamiliar with their own bylaws, and there is a need for board training so that property management companies do not take full advantage of a community whose board of directors allow the management companies to run amok on communities because of the board's lack of knowledge of their bylaws and governing documents and the Maryland Homeowners Association Act. So for that reason, I am definitely in favor of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, let's go to Sheila Hernandez.
Yes.
Sheila, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Sheila Daniels Enriquez. I live in Severn, Maryland. I'm in support of HB 0026. This bill is imperative, so homeowner rights are protected. The state of Maryland requires CPA firms to be licensed and management companies not, having to do the same. That's not understandable because management companies do much of the same as CPA firms, such as receiving, containing, managing hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars of people money whom they service. Here are some reasons why management companies should be licensed to limit or stop the following: retaliation and harassment by management companies, to stop non-disclosure of financial documentation to homeowners upon request, limit expensive fees charged to each homeowner when requesting their financial documents, to prevent misappropriation of community funds, to prevent lack of respect and professionalism to homeowners. It's unconstitutional to think that because a homeowner who requests financial documentation, and this has happened, or if they state their concerns about the community financial status, it results in being harassed or retaliated against from their management companies. And in some cases, as with me, lied about to their community so the management company can protect themselves, or just because they don't personally like you. Sadly, this happens much, and it's the majority of management companies that do such horrible acts. Why? Because they have no one to report to, no office within the state of Maryland that holds management companies accountable, and they need to be held accountable for their actions, especially since they are running a supposed to be legal business and they are managing community money, which is a community's livelihood that should be protected. You can change this with your vote of yes for this bill. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And the final proponent is Patricia Thomas. And before Patricia, you testify, I just want to welcome to the committee for the first time our new delegate, Roxanne Prettyman, who was unable to join us last week. It's great to have you. Welcome to the committee. And with that, let me also welcome Patricia Thomas, who is testifying in favor of House Bill 26.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman and Vice Chairman, and welcome to all of the members of the committee. I'm Patricia Thomas, and I'm a condo ownership owner in Howard County. As a condo owner, it is very important that community managers be licensed. If you're going to be working in this field, you should have a current license that certifies you. All professions have some kind of licensing process to show their professionalism. Community managers should not be able to work in communities that require knowledge, skills, and abilities for many specific areas unless they show that they're able to handle the tasks by accreditation of their training and education by a license. If mistakes occur on their watch because of their judgment and advice, their license should be targeted. They should not be let off without some consequences. Unlicensed managers can continue to another job without any penalties for their actions. This bill is necessary to stop so many imposters. Thank you for your consideration of this bill.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to questions for the proponents. The first goes to Delegate Clark and the next to Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Holmes, I voted for this bill last year, but I needed a little more re-education on it so I can get it back in my mind. So if we have, as opposed to a management company that is managing a 80 condo building, and that is done by the condo condominium board of directors, elected board, and they have just a manager, a resident manager that lives in the building that oversees the property during the day. Would that turn that condo board into a management company? And would the folks that serve on that board have to become certified, take courses and become certified?
Great question, Delegate Clark. And if you look on page 5 of the bill, page 5 of the bill outlines some provisions of those persons who, as you indicate, are members or residents of a condominium that have taken the limited license course. And in the case specifically that you asked, I'm going to try to find that really very, very quickly. But there is a provision within this bill, and I can't find the exact wording on it, but it's on, look on page 5. And on page 5, it gives you some indications of some persons. Here it is. Page 5 is line number 20. A member of the governing body of a, wait a minute, let me back up. At the very top on line 6, it says provisions of this title that require an individual to be issued a license or limited license do not prohibit. And going down now to line number 20. A member of the governing body of a common ownership community who acts without compensation from providing management services for that common owner community. And back up to line 17, again, persons taking a limited, getting a limited license, a resident of a common ownership community who acts without compensation from providing management services for that common ownership community. But I would suggest to you, Delegate Clark, that you read in its entirety all of that on page 5 to answer your specific question.
Okay, so because I mean, the one thing I don't want to see us have to get into where you have an elected board of condominium owners that serve on that board and they rotate over so many years or move out, have to be licensed, because then you would have a lot of problems filling that board with people.
Well, I want to be clear here. Licensing of board members is not in this bill.
Okay.
Licensing of board members, stay tuned, will be coming up later.
How come everything I asked you about comes up later? Okay. And so, and one other quick question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. So if you have a resident, if you have someone that lives in the building that's a resident manager, for lack of a better word, but just it oversees the security of the building and general upkeep, would they have to be licensed?
Again, I would suggest that you take a look at page 5 and get all the specifics in terms of the ins and outs of that, Delegate Clark, if you don't mind.
Okay, I will.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, next, Delegate Boyce, followed by Delegate Wyvil.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate Holmes. Always so efficient and detailed. So I wanted to, before I ask my question, follow up on Delegate Clark's question, because the way I read and scanned page 5 is that those board members would not have to be licensed. And maybe I'm misreading, but the follow-up question to even that is, I just want to make sure I'm clear that I could decide, someone could put me in charge of being a community manager. I can go on Vista Print or somewhere else, print cards, and I would be considered the manager. I'd be paid whatever salary. But there is nothing beholding me to true accountability should something happen, 1. And 2, there is no other state requirement to even be certified in this realm. You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, let me take your second question first.
Yes, sir.
There is no entity in the entire state of Maryland where anyone can go to for assistance with this kind of item or issue except for the Attorney General's office. And in most cases, if you are trying to get to the Attorney General's office, because they're being overwhelmed with questions in terms of assistance, in most cases, and I'm going to ask Karen Strawn to weigh in on this if I could, Mr. Chair. In most cases, when you solicit the assistance of the Attorney General's office, I think you must file a claim because they have so many requests for assistance on these topics and help with those issues. Now, and if I could pause.
Yeah, let me just jump in. So I understand that. So what you're saying is that there is no. So I don't have to be certified in any way, shape, or form to be a community resident manager at all.
Right now, the only thing you have to do is go to Staples and get a card that says you're a community manager.
Understood. So again, there is no certification at all to be a community resident manager other than one's personal fulfillment and wanting to gain more knowledge.
That's completely it. No requirements, zip, nada, none. Go to Staples.
And so isn't it so in creating this board, you create an accountability arm that would then alleviate the AG's office, but most importantly, have a direct office, direct licensure program and organization that can hold these individuals accountable who misuse funds or mismanage properties, so on and so forth. Isn't that so?
You are 100% correct, Delegate Voice, as usual.
Thank you, Delegate Holmes. I think Karen might want to add something.
No, I'm fine. I just was prepared because he initially said he was going to pull me in, but yes, you're absolutely correct.
Oh, the committee that sucks up together stays together. Delegate Weibel.
Let's see if we can put an end to that. Just kidding. Delegate Holmes. So just following up on Delegate Clark. So if I read this correctly on page 5, if a member of the common ownership community is receiving compensation, then they do fall under the requirements of this bill, correct?
Well, not on that. Well, let me expand upon it a little bit more. I was trying not to go into too much detail, which is usually what is done in the subcommittee. Now, going back to page 5. Page 5 indicates that the provision of this title that require an individual to be issued a license or limited license. Okay, that's what it talks about at the top of page, at the line 6 on page 6. So beginning there, it indicates specifically that if you do have a limited license or license, again, that requires testing and knowledge of the industry. Okay, and then that means then as you go down to line 17 and line 18, which is coordinating with the community, which is for compensation for, as long as you don't work for compensation. Okay.
You're right, and that line 17 is what I'm focused on. So it says a resident of the common ownership community who acts without compensation. So if that resident's paid a small stipend, like $250 to cover expenses or whatever, they would require to be licensed.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, they would. Because
Okay.
if you got in using your specific example, if someone is receiving compensation, then they have to have a contract. And what I'm attempting to do is to eliminate persons contracting for a specific service that requires specific knowledge without having training.
Okay, but what I
And
guess what
licensure.
the examples that I'm familiar with there, I don't think there's any contracts. It's just somebody agrees to serve as, say, president of the association, and they're compensated at immaterial amounts for their expenses out of pocket. It's an unaccountable plan. They would be subject to licensure.
Yes, sir. If you look back at line 6, it talks about the license required. Yes, sir.
All right,
So
thank you.
we can discuss that in further detail, as I'm sure we will, Delegate Weibel.
Well, this is unamended though, so it doesn't go to subcommittee, correct?
Well, I'll leave that up to the chair.
Okay, thank you.
You're on mute, Chairman.
Yeah, it's passed the committee before. I'd like to move it straight to the full committee, but if people have a big objection, I'd like for you, Will, and the sponsor to talk about this, and let's reconnect, okay? Okay. Okay, Regina, would you like another question here before we go to the opponent? You're muted.
Yes, one small follow-up to the follow-up of Delegate Clark and now Delegate Weibel. So the individual is compensated a couple of dollars to do some managing, but who is putting that person in charge? Would not the person who put that person in charge be the person that should be licensed versus the person who is being paid the small fee to essentially, sounds like, help out the actual manager?
If you are receiving compensation, there are 3 levels of management in this bill.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And
Page 5.
Pardon?
Page 5.
Well, actually, the three levels of licensure are deeper into the bill.
Got it.
But if you're receiving compensation, you must be licensed. Okay. And you must be licensed. You have to have a license.
And to your point, you want more accountability so folks don't put it on some person to just get $200 a month to do a job that, to your point, is a larger job than maybe some, house sweeping and in checking corners.
That is exactly correct.
Okay.
And we can talk.
That's all I need, Delegate. I won't waste your time. That's all I needed.
You're
I
right.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to one person has signed up in opposition, Lee Greenwood. You have 2 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair Barve, Vice Chair Stein, and members of the committee. My name is Lee Greenwood. I am with Associa. For those who don't know, Associa, we are the largest, common ownership community association management company in the country. We operate in 38 states, including in Maryland. In fact, in Maryland, we've been operating for over 3 decades. We have 200 plus staff members. We operate across the state in about 390 or so communities, and we operate tens of thousands of, managed on behalf of associations, tens of thousands of units throughout the state. Sorry, it's very dry in my house. We oppose this bill and from Delegate Holmes, and I've submitted testimony laying out some of the details that I won't rehash here, but I did want to just point to a few things. And I want to start by saying we appreciate Delegate Holmes. He's been a great champion for our industry for many years, and we enjoy working with him and look forward to working with you, sir, for many years to come, we hope. in short, this bill will not do what it's hoping. The intent is to raise consumer protection. And what we have seen from data from across the country is that bills like licensure bills like this actually don't accomplish that goal. And just south of us in the Commonwealth of Virginia, they have licensure for these managers, and the Joint Committee on an audit committee, actually a bipartisan audit committee, actually came back and revisited the issue recently and found that the bill didn't achieve its goal, and they actually recommended to repeal the license there. It's why only 8 states now have licensure of this profession to begin with, and why we think that it's a bad choice for Maryland. I will want to add one other note that there is a provision in the bill for reciprocity for folks who are moving into the state to be managers, excuse me. And the provision actually would prohibit and put more barriers in place because it requires folks to be regulated in the state where they're coming from. And again, there are only 8 states that have that type of regulation. So we're just putting up more barriers for folks to move into the state. And 1 million plus people live in these types of associations throughout Maryland. And as more and more do, we shouldn't be making it harder and harder to manage these properties and raising costs for those residents. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Greenwood. It appears the sponsor has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Greenwood. And for the members of the committee, Mr. Greenwood and I, we are members of same organization. I am a member of the same organization that he's a member of, and I know Associa to be a very good group as well. The question that I have for Mr. Greenwood is, in Associa, would you say that probably 95% of your members are professionally trained in community management?
Great question. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I would say that as our company, what we do is we certainly encourage our managers to get certification, which is available, and we pay for that certification. And I mean, I'll note, frankly, that a bill like this, if it became law, would actually benefit a company like Associa. We are a well-resourced, well-financed, large company, and what it would do is would put out of business a lot of smaller mom and pop type management companies. And so, it's good for us on a personal level, but we just think that for the industry itself and for consumer protection and for, the real risk of rising housing costs, it's just the wrong choice.
No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions before we leave House Bill 26? Okay. Delegate Boyce.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on the sponsor's question about, so you don't know, and I'm sorry, I had to run out really quick. My cat's wilding out. You don't know how many of your members, which I know you have a couple of thousand million, are professionally certified or licensed or
was there more, Delegate Boyce? I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, I'm asking you the question. The follow-up question is: you don't know the number of your members that are actually professionalized, certified, licensed?
Well, those are 3 separate categories. I don't have an answer for you.
It's a form of professionalizing, whether or not you're certified or if you have a licensure, or are these folks real estate? They have real estate license. I'm just curious about the professionalism of your association, like how many of them are, I guess the better word is credentialed versus not credentialed.
Sure. And I just want to clarify one point, if I could, so we're all speaking on the same page. Is we are not an association. We are a company, a private company that manages community associations around the country and throughout.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So I don't have the data, to be honest with you, on the percentage of folks who hold credentials of one type or another. I can seek that out and try to get an answer for you, but like I said, we certainly encourage all of our folks to get some sort of professional credentialing, and we pay for that fully for anyone who seeks it out.
Okay, so you encourage it, but you don't require it.
Exactly.
So you may have individuals, to the delegate's point, that may just be doing this to do it. They got pretty cards that they printed up, and there's something that it's a profession that they have, but they're not credentialed in any way to be able to, what one would say, to do the work.
Well, so it's a great question, and what I'd say is,
look, I don't want a doctor working on me that hasn't passed, his licensures or hasn't had a residency. So I think it's an important question to get at, I think. Sure.
And I guess what I would say is that, how do I answer that?
Just be honest.
It's a fair question. Our managers are not operating obviously in a silo. They work for a company, and we supervise everything, and we have managers in all sorts of levels of branch presidents, and so we're not hiring folks just. We are a company that hires the best, and we have the highest standards in the industry, and we take pride in those standards. So while we don't, I would not equate registration or regulation or licensure certainly with high quality. Those two things are not mutually.
I didn't say high quality. I said credentialed. I think there's a difference. Again, to the same point, I could have a very highly credentialed doctor who's terrible. I guess the point I'm making is about background knowledge, understanding of different laws, understanding the difference between who's got a governing body and who doesn't, who's got bylaws, who doesn't, what can happen based on what state or city or town that one is in. I think it's important for someone to be able to know that as a manager. So it sounds like what I'm hearing you saying, and I'll end this so we can move on, is that you don't necessarily know or ask about credentialing, but that you believe your organization's high standards would account for one being accredited per se.
Well, again, we aren't just hiring blindly. We obviously go through pretty thorough interviewing.
No, which is why you have a criteria. You have a very high, standard.
And part of,
I think, Mr. Greenwood, your answer to the question is probably just yes, probably.
Yes. Well, I don't think it's a matter of we hire only regulated or unregulated folks. We hire the best folks who know the industry and are competent for their jobs. So again, I think we're equating here regulation with quality and competence. And what we've seen throughout the country is that that's a false equation. And that's why, Colorado recently actually just repealed their licensure for this profession, and why only 8 states have any type of licensure requirement to begin with.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Delegate Clark has a question.
Just one follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Holmes, when I'm reading through the items on page 5 and number 5 and number 6, where it speaks to attorneys at law, and also individuals that are CPAs, licensed real estate brokers, and licensed associate.
Jerry,
yes.
Jared, do you have a question for the?
Yeah. My question is, does that exempt a real estate brokerage from having to be certified to represent a common area or a condo association or something like that as a management group?
If I could, Delegate Clark and Chairman Barve, let me get with Delegate Clark offline. So I can see that Mr. Chairman wants to move forward with the next bill.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to have Delegate Clark ask Mr. Greenwood a question, but if it's for you, the two of you need to huddle.
Okay, and that's fine. I just can't read that fast.
Yeah, who can these days? Okay, there appear to be no further questions for Mr. Greenwood, so thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 26. We'll proceed to House Bill 42. Delegate Lasanti, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Marianne Lasanti for the record. I appreciate being here with you today. House Bill 42 addresses the process of how to become a municipality. This bill is not meant to be to create a controversy between county and local government, but where there is money and resources involved, sadly, that often becomes the outcome. This bill is not in any way meant to favor local government over county government. I have served in both and value their different but equal roles. This bill is about citizen rights to organize, petition their government, and to be heard. The current law does not provide those rights. The power is with the counties to deny citizens the right to become a municipality. Under current law, if 100% of the registered voters petition to become a municipality, that petition can be denied. That, to me, is not democracy. For a little bit of history, since 1957, there are 157 municipalities in the state of Maryland. Since 1957, only 5 successful attempts have occurred, most of them being special taxing districts. I'm sure we can understand why those petitions became successful. But I ask you to follow the money. Every state and local funding program, whether it be community development block grant, parks and playgrounds, heritage areas, waterway improvements, highway user, police and fire aid, all require those state or federal funds to be funneled to the county first and then distributed. The impact of the current law is very simple. Funds and resources rarely trickle down to underserved communities. Maybe our current law is why there are so many needs in unincorporated areas that are not being met. The recent Federal CARES Funding Act, which distributed funds directly from the federal government to incorporated governments such as counties and municipalities, highlighted this disparity. So much money came into local jurisdictions, but not in areas where there are unincorporated parts of the county. You may have noticed that this bill that I brought to you today is a little bit different than last year's. Last year's bill required the county government to act on a petition. This year's bill simply says they must consider it. In other words, they must vote on the petition that is brought to them by their citizens. This was meant to accommodate counties and maybe be a baby step to address the problem at hand. So therefore, I ask for a favorable report on House Bill 42. Thank you.
Okay, there is one, you know what, actually, the next person testifying is favorable to amendment. So we'll take questions for the sponsor right now. And the first hand up was Delegate Ruth, followed by Delegate Boyce, in that order.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I think you may have answered this towards the end, but it says, the bill says the county commissioners or county council shall consider the referendum request. And I just wonder, and wow, I'm getting weird light on me. I just wondered if you could address what that means to consider. And I heard you say vote, but it doesn't say vote, and consider seems like a very vague term.
On most county council agendas, they ask to consider petitions. That's just the language that is used for a vote. They consider it up or down. It certainly could be, if you feel that vote is a more straightforward word, that would I certainly would think that would be appropriate.
Or maybe a definition.
That's what I'm trying to do. That's my goal. My goal is for them to not just take the petition and shove it in the desk, to actually listen to the public and take their public hearing, their public input and vote on it.
And thank you. And I guess consider is not defined anywhere that you know of.
It was a word that came that in working with the bill drafter, that was a term that was that is very typical among legislative bodies to consider an issue. It means that you bring it forward is what the actual definition of in law is.
Okay, thank you for explaining.
Yeah.
So just one other question. I see that the testimony from Mako, and I just wondered if you had talked to MML about this, or if they have.
I have, and MML supported the bill last year when it was requiring the county to act, and having served in both realms. County governments, local governments, as we know, don't like to be told what to do. So it's a soft walk. And the bottom line is, and very often when you can't find a compromise, there's no action. And this issue is too important to not bring before the committee and work with the committee in your wisdom to figure out what the best outcome is. In my conversation with MML, they want to see it. They want to see more teeth in the bill. They want to see something stronger, which then becomes, do we set a higher threshold for the petition, 40% or maybe, and I have drafted some amendments for the committee to review to look at just simply a majority. If a majority of the voters, of the registered voters in that particular area petition, then it must come to a vote. So I really hope to have an in-depth conversation with the committee about the outcomes, but certainly I'm open to any suggestions, because it's a problem that just needs to be resolved. There's so many communities, particularly, and I see them throughout the state, where they just don't have access to funds. They have to wait in line. And there's so many funding programs that they're just not eligible for.
Thank you.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Boyce.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I wanted to actually wait to hear the testimony with the amendments and take my question after that.
Okay.
Is that okay,
All
sir?
right. Yeah, that's absolutely
Thank
fine.
you.
So let's next welcome to the committee David Martin, who's with the City of Havre de Grace. David, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes, and let us know what your amendment is that you want to add to the bill.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barve and honorable members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. I appreciate you taking the time to hear me. My name is David Martin. I'm a council member from the City of Havre de Grace. I am in support of House Bill 42 with amendments. The amendment is adding the following requirements, so thank you, Delegate Ruth, for your comment. To page 2, line 2A, the county commissioners or county council shall consider from the dais in a normally scheduled councilmatic session with a public vote, the referendum. The other alternative is to create a process to petition the state of Maryland. This would allow a neutral party to determine the adverse impact on the county versus the needs of a community. Municipal government is the closest form of government to our constituents. It's often said that a municipal charter is equivalent to the constitution of a state or nation. Council and commission members meet their constituents daily while performing their daily tasks, shopping, community events, library, or just walking down the streets. Our constituents know our home address and home phone numbers. The process of municipal government creates the ability for home rule. In today's time of police reform and defunding the police, the considerations for the desire, concerns, and thought of municipalities and communities are being forgotten. An easier process for the creation of municipality and the inclusion of home rule would allow the creation of guidelines established by the community for duties, procedures, and responsibilities of their local law enforcement. Municipalities can determine the additional programming needs to provide the best opportunity for inclusion, keeping their community safe. Inclusiveness and communication will allow law enforcement agencies to enhance their community presence, involvement, and understanding while improving public safety. In closing, an easier process needs to be created for communities to become a municipality. Thank you again for your time and allowing me to speak.
Okay, Delegate Boyce has a question.
Thank you so much. Delegate Lasanti, can you let me know how many municipalities don't have this ability, don't have the ability?
All municipalities have the ability. This bill is for non-incorporated areas to become a municipality.
And how many of those are we talking about?
There could be hundreds. I can speak to several that I know of where, and I can take one out of my district, the community of Edgewood. They filed a petition several years ago to the county government and said, we already have 3 municipalities in Harford County: Aberdeen, Havre de Grace, and Bel Air. They actually, the community of Edgewood is larger than all 3 of them combined. And they have to wait in line for a lot of resources that often don't ever make it to the community. So there's a community that would like to become a municipality. However, attempts have been blocked over the years for them to do that. But this is a statewide bill. So any community.
I understand that. I'm trying to get to how many
potential municipalities,
unincorporated communities are we talking about?
All. As you know, anything in a county that is not a municipality, any community that is not in a municipality it would be subject to this bill.
But you don't know how many we're talking about.
I don't know how many I don't know how to count how many unincorporated areas there are in the state of Maryland.
Yeah, you can't really count the number of things that don't exist.
Right.
True, but I think it's important to figure out how many could be, positively affected by this. If you're saying that this is something that is
thousands, any community
Okay.
over 300. The current law is that an area in a defined area that has 300 people or more can petition. That's I think where you're going. Can petition the government, their county government, to become a municipality.
Well, let me follow up with a question, Delegate Lasanti. So in your bills, it's currently drafted, what percentage of people would have to sign the petition?
40% of the people within the defined area.
So a homeowners association could petition if 40% of the adults.
They certainly could. Absolutely. Absolutely. And to give you another example, I mean, Baltimore County, for instance, has no municipalities. Towson, for instance, is a large example. A homeowners association could be a smaller example. It's the right to organize and self-govern is what we're really talking about here.
Okay. There appear to be no further questions. So Delegate Healy. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There we go. You're still muted.
How's that? Better?
That's good.
Okay, thank you. It's always a challenge. I just wanted to address what a Delegate Boyce is asking about, because it is really hard to determine. And a homeowners association is an interesting situation because we're talking about the residents, the people who live there having a vote, whereas in most homeowners associations, it's the homeowners who may be absentee landlords that have the control. So if a homeowners association has a lot of people that are renters living there as well, they have, under the current law, just don't have any rights as a municipality. If this bill were to pass, they might, if they were able to get that 40% and make the petition and meet all the standards that are laid out in the bill. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the 300 number is a good number, although a lot of municipalities in the state of Maryland now have fewer than 300 people. And quite a few of them in Prince George's County, as a matter of fact. So that's all. I just wanted to make sure that Delegate Sandy, does that actually line up with what your research has shown?
Absolutely. It certainly does.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to I believe only one person is signed up in opposition, and that's because Dominic, Mike Sanderson is here. Mike,
Thank you, Mr.
you've got
Chair.
2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Michael Sanderson with the Maryland Association of Counties. The sponsor reached out to MACO and to county governments on this issue in advance, which we appreciate. She's about as knowledgeable about local government as virtually anybody in the state. I'm also pretty familiar with some of the issues that have been raised with the committee and with the sponsor, with the Edgewood community and so forth. And I don't think you can help but have some sympathy for those issues. My comments on the bill are multifold. Some of them have already been brought up by committee questions. Establishing a standard of consider in the bill, it is an undefined term in state law. If the sponsor thinks that means bring it to a vote, I'm not sure that that's really clear. What I am sure about is that if you create a new standard for what an actor in this legal process has to do, you effectively created a cause of action for someone who's upset about the final outcome. I do want to say that if the thrust of the bill is to say that we just need to recognize if people want to draw a circle around themselves and incorporate, that we ought to just let it happen. That was last year's bill, and I think the sponsor has some sympathy in that direction. Please understand that municipal incorporation has consequences for other towns, for the county government, and for the state. Planning and zoning issue, one of the provinces of this committee. If your county is regulating growth, looking at public facilities, you no longer can do that hand in glove with your school systems and so forth if the municipality takes over planning and zoning responsibilities. Highway user revenues, that would actually be a distribution at the expense of other towns and cities. And income taxes, most of all, become a direct distribution right to the municipal government, independent of any level of service that they might have in mind. All of those are the reason why this Maryland law has checks and balances like it does. There might be intermediate solutions for places like Edgewood, a business improvement district, a special taxing district, something along those lines. I hope that the local issue in Hartford has a solution that might be short of a statewide bill like this, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, let me just ask you a quick question here. You know, obviously the bill, Mr. Sanderson, the bill as it's currently drafted has 40%. Is it conceivable that you might change your mind if the level were substantially higher, or is it that you would never take a position in favor of this sort of thing?
I'll do my best to gauge what I think is the sentiment of the county elected officials who are part of our legislative committee. I don't think it's the 40% threshold that's our sticking point. The share of the people inside the proposed jurisdiction who might think that incorporation is a good idea is a part of the puzzle, but the effects on operations and finances right next to and surrounding the municipal area are important too. So whether it were 51% or 75% of the property owners or residents or whomever inside the circle isn't the complete story. So whether it's automatic approval or some new standard of care or something along those lines, any of those things, if the arrow is pointing toward let's open the door for more incorporations, there's more voices involved than just the people who say, I want to get my trash picked up twice a week.
Okay, fair enough. Any other questions from Mr. Sanderson before we leave this bill? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 42.
Chairman, did you call up Dominic Bushko?
His name is crossed out on my list.
Oh, fair enough. I might just not have an updated one. Apologies.
I'm covering for him.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, no, but thank you for asking me. Okay, we'll proceed now to House Bill 81, Delegate Ambry.
Hello, good afternoon, honorable members of the Environment and Transportation Committee, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. It's an honor to be with you all today. And I want to voice my support for House Bill 81. I'm a former teacher, and something that's near and dear to my heart is always finding out ways in which we can better support teachers and those who are working in our schools. And I think after this pandemic, it has revealed just how important it is that we find more ways in which we can support our teachers and the education community. So what House Bill 81 does is it requires the Community Development Administration and the Department of Housing and Community Development to administer a home buying assistance program that assists all school staff members to receive some type of home support programming, and requires the administration to administer certain community development projects to provide all school staff members with certain financial assistance to buy homes near where the members are employed under certain circumstances. So it's an enabling legislation in which we will be allowing localities to determine how to implement such programs. School staff members such as teachers, counselors, nurses, and et cetera, have been overwhelmed with financial struggles over the past few years and making ends meet, especially dealing with the past pandemic and adjustments and acts. To administer a home buying assistance program for educators and school staff is an innovative way to attempt to move these teachers and staff into their districts to better support the communities that they serve. And it will align experience and expectations, align for more informed and equitable learning. I, as a former teacher myself, actually lived in every zip code of where I used to teach in West Baltimore and Southeast DC. And it allowed me to have more buy-in with my families, allowed me to connect with my students. So a program like this has a twofold benefit, in that not only will it support teachers and other school staff members in being able to afford to buy homes in their communities, it'll also allow them to be a better pillar in their community, which we know has better outcomes for our students. Also thinking about how this would impact my district and cities like Baltimore, it's important to realize that, hey, over the past 10 years, we unfortunately have seen a population decline, and having more programming that encourages those who work in the city to come and live in the city is an important way that we can encourage more development and more homes full of people such as teachers and educators. School staff members who live outside the city are significantly contributing to the instructor-student disparities. This lays from the city's poverty, economic stratification, and racial disparities. They're main elemental to student experience. School staff members are nonetheless asked to build community with a classroom environment that lives in a very different reality from their own in some circumstances. And that's why we feel as though a program like this would be super beneficial. Therefore, our office intends for this bill to combat some of these issues while also supporting our teachers and other staff members in the school setting, and seek to create a program very similar to the Live Near Where You Live Near Your School program that Delegate Tony Bridges introduced last year that moved through our committee, House Bill 943, for teachers and school staff, which authorizes the government and local localities to implement the program, as well as the program to provide down payment assistance, and also to explore the opportunity for there to also be a way in which we can provide some type of property tax credits or relief. Just as a note, we sent over an amendment that was not captured in this bill currently. Currently, the bill reads, defines teachers as a very narrowed type of staff member in the school building. We plan to expand the amendments that we sent over, do some technical issues on the bill drafters end. We weren't able to get those amendments into the bill, but the bill will be amended to include a more wide definition of those who support our schools, support our students in the school building, not just those who are certified or licensed. It also, from people who work at the front desk to people who are supporting our students after school, who are employed by the school systems and work in the schools, will be able to take advantage of this program. And thus, after this amendment, and thank you all so much for listening, I urge a favorable report for House Bill 81 and look forward to questions and the testimony that will be coming forward. Thank you.
Okay, it appears that we have only one person who has signed up to testify in favor of the bill, and after that person does, we'll go to questions. So Franca Muller-Paz.
Hi, I'm here. How are you doing?
We're doing great. You have 2 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. My name is Franca Muller-Paz, and I'm a Baltimore resident and a teacher in Baltimore City Schools, and I support House Bill 81. This bill will financially support educators by granting low-interest mortgages for the purchase of homes near where they are employed. We need incentives for our educators, like this bill, now more than ever. In light of the severe pressures caused by the COVID crisis, teachers and paraeducators are exiting the profession in droves, with huge spikes in resignations and early retirements. According to Cheryl Bose, the leader of the Maryland State Education Association, we are struggling with vacancies in classrooms across the state, and in some districts, there are hundreds of vacancies. In the face of these shortages, every day, students are being herded into gymnasiums, auditoriums, enduring chaotic environments in our schools, and falling further behind. It is so crucial that incentives for our educators, like this bill, be implemented immediately. We must encourage educators to stay in the classroom, in our state, in our cities, or we will continue to see a mass exodus of teachers, leaving our classrooms overcrowded and students without the important resources and support that educators provide. In addition to providing a meaningful incentive that can help reverse these shortages, having teachers in our community provides many direct benefits to students. After school programs mostly rely on the voluntary participation of teachers and paraeducators. One way we can see more coaches, assistant coaches, advisors for clubs, and extra help for our students before and after school is to reduce the commute of our educators. As one teacher told me who lives 45 minutes from our school, do I stay and coach this season, or do I go home and remember what my husband and kids look like? This disconnect between the communities of our students and the homes of our teachers denies students educators who better understand them, their motivations, their interests. It gives us all a better chance to make relevant curriculum that our kids deserve. As Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, says, it's important for teachers to live and make roots in the communities where they teach. Yet renting or buying a home in expensive cities and communities is financially out of reach for most educators. Salary increases alone won't do the trick. I respectfully urge the committee to issue a favorable report on House Bill 81 and expand it to both educators who require a teaching certificate and educators who do not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Franca, you might want to adjust your microphone a little bit because I had a little bit of trouble hearing you, but I was able to hear you. So if you have an adjustment, you might want to make it. Okay, so we have 3 people who have their hands up for questions, and the order is, if I can get there, hold on. Yeah, it's going to be Delegate Love and Delegate Boyce and Delegate Healy in that order. Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Amprey, thank you for bringing this bill. Really interested in it. I think it's a great idea. Have you had a chance to look at the letter from DHCD?
I do not believe I had a chance to look at that letter yet. I believe I have a summary of some of the letters, but I haven't got a chance to look at it yet. But if you want to expand upon what you've read, or
Yes, I think it would be great if you had a chance to look at it, and then maybe in subcommittee, the subcommittee can dive into it more. In short, what they say is that this is already basically covered under the current program. It's an employer-based program, House Keys for Employees,
right,
and school systems already participate, Calvert County, Charles County, Baltimore City, and at least one private school. And so if I'm reading their letter correctly, it sounds like they're saying what you're proposing can already be covered by this. And if required to set up a whole new program, that would be somewhat duplicative.
No, yeah. So I don't think I can't remember reading their letter, but I did read the full fiscal note, and those comments were there as well. And I would say, I would agree in part with what they're saying. The only thing I would push back is I think this bill would expand upon those members who would be eligible for the financial benefit. And then the other thing that we want to make sure that we're including in this is that outside of just down payment assistance, just thinking about how the localities can implement some type of way to support those, especially in a city like Baltimore, where our property taxes are really high, figuring out ways in which we can support people on how to provide some type of property tax adjustment for those who are serving in our schools as part of the program to encourage them to live near the school. So I don't believe the current program that is in place does any type of assistance there.
So, Mr. Chair, one follow-up, if I may.
Sure.
So would you consider, rather than setting up a whole new program, working your concerns about who isn't included and broadening that language into the current program?
That's something I would consider, but I would need more time to evaluate if that could work based on what the current program exists. And I think the other thing is just having localities understand like what a better understanding of what other types of homeowner incentives could work best in their districts. I think that's the other component of what I think separates my bill from what's already in place. But I believe in streamlining things and making things more simple. So I'm happy to at least give it a look and consideration.
Great. Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Delegate Boyce.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Literally, Delegate Love asked every one of my questions. So, so I do. I mean, to that point, I think it sounds like if you're open to it, we could potentially expand that current program to do all the additional things that you want. But yeah, they're saying it's duplicative. So I just wanted to check in with the sponsor about that.
Yep. And yeah, thank you, Delegate Boyce. And I think I got to just dig more into that current program, because my understanding of the program is that mine would be a little different when I first proposed the bill, but I'll have to dig a little further. But at the end of the day, I want to be as resourceful as possible.
Oh, I'm happy to help you with it as well.
Yep.
Okay, Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Delegate OBrien, thank you so much for bringing the bill. I think it's, the concept is really something that a lot of us have hoped to see more of. But I wanted to just ask a kind of a devil's advocate kind of question about just trying to see, like, turn it around and see if there's an unintended consequence. If would this potentially have the consequence of having teachers moving to other school systems because they want to live in those communities?
I think, again, and this is why I really want localities to have more control over how they set up their programs, right? So I think that's always a possibility, maybe. I think that ultimately the cities and areas that are in most need of teachers and communities that are in most need of repopulation are probably going to have better benefits and programming that they can put in place. So I think that I'm not fearful of that effect taking place. The thing that the only thing that I would love to see is just more people who thinking about my district and thinking about my experience as an educator. If you live in the suburbs or you live further away from your school, figuring out a way to get you to be more connected to the community. That's the ultimate consequence that I want. But I don't foresee that being a problem. I think the one thing that would be beneficial in a sense is that we think about just as Franca mentioned earlier, we're going through our entire country is having a teacher shortage. So if people in Maryland's having a teacher shortage, in Baltimore City's having a teacher shortage, so people are moving from other states to come live in Maryland and work in Maryland to help us with our shortage, then I think that's a good thing. So I think it's ultimately going to be some movement, but I don't think it's going to be anything detrimental to any school district as a result of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, there is no one else signed up to testify. Is there anybody else who wants to ask a question? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 81. We'll proceed to House Bill 86, the first of Delegate Stewart's two bills before us today. Delegate Stewart, you got 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish I could tell the committee that these would be my only two bills of the session before the committee, but I think everybody knows better. So thank you, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair. For the record, I'm Vaughn Stewart, and this is House Bill 86, the Tenant Protection Act. This bill might sound familiar to you, and that's because it's the third time in a row that I've introduced it. In 2020, it passed the House unanimously, and of course, this committee unanimously as well, but didn't receive a vote in JPR before the onset or after the onset of the pandemic. In 2021, it passed the House in an overwhelmingly bipartisan fashion, but also didn't receive a vote in JPR. So we're back again, and call me a hopeless optimist, but I believe that the third time will be the charm because, in part, the Vice Chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee is now the Senate sponsor of this bill. So to remind you, this bill includes 4 separate pieces. First, it extends existing lease termination protections for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault to all victims of abuse, and it gives certain qualified third-party professionals the authority to verify if a tenant is indeed a victim of abuse. Second, the bill mandates more transparency from landlords who use what's called a ratio utility billing system, and it requires them to notify tenants in writing basically what they're being charged for. Third, the bill compels landlords withholding any part of a security deposit to provide tenants with supporting documentation, basically show them the receipts. And finally, the bill grants tenants the ability to use common spaces within the building for free for the purposes of organizing tenants associations and conducting tenants association meetings. So again, the bill is not particularly controversial. Both AOBA and tenant groups have wholeheartedly endorsed the bill. We've worked with AOBA and MMHA extensively over the years. I appreciate all of their hard work on this. We've incorporated a few of MMHA's concerns in previous sessions. I believe they've submitted a couple more potential amendments this year that I'm open to. I would normally, Mr. Chair, reject the amendment so that the bill can be fast-tracked immediately to the committee's voting list. However, this session, we have actually worked with victims advocates organizations on a few amendments related to that part of the bill. They have proposed, I think, some very sensible technical fixes to the language that I think are commonsensical, and they'll talk more about that in their testimony. And so I've introduced these, small fixes as sponsor amendments for the subcommittee's consideration. So since that means that it will go to the subcommittee, I'm happy to also chat with MMHA about their concerns as well. And I'm hopeful that we can all sing Kumbaya and all come together on this product, and that finally, at long last, after several years of trying, we will be able to get it through the Senate as well. So in conclusion, most landlords, I think, try to do right by their tenants, but unfortunately some do not. And HB 86 includes 4 very common sense ways to ensure that every single Marylander is treated with dignity. And I urge a favorable report.
Yeah, from what I see here, as you introduced it without those amendments, there's no opposition to the bill. So we'll just have to work with, we'll work it in subcommittee, but we're early in the session, so I don't think that it'll be a problem.
Yeah, and the amendments are very straightforward, Mr. Chair. So I think I very much trust the subcommittee to expeditiously do their work.
Yeah. Okay. So we have Zafar Shah first, and with the Public Justice Center, and then somebody, although they didn't write their name down, with Legal Aid. And let's just go to Zafar Shah first. Zafar, welcome back to the committee.
Hey, thank you, Chair Barve and Vice Chair Stein, members of the committee. I'm Zafar Shah from Public Justice Center. We are a multi-issue advocacy and legal services organization. We've provided legal assistance to over 600 renter households last year, and we're a member of the Renters United Maryland Coalition. I just want to thank Delegate Stewart for bringing back this bill after 2 tries. We support and have supported the 4 measures in this bill. And I'll focus on one of those measures, which is on ratio utility billing systems and transparency.
Hey, Zafar, could you just hold on for 1 second? Ben, could you start up the clock, please? Well, go ahead, Zafar. You're getting some 3 seconds here.
I've got an internal two-minute clock.
Okay, there we go.
So the bill has some very important transparency provisions to help renters understand energy and water charges that are included in a ratio utility billing system. And what RUBS is, ratio utility billing system, is basically when a landlord, typically in a multifamily property, gets charges for utilities on a master meter. And to charge each unit, they don't have sub meters or individual meters. They use a allocation formula, some type of calculation. This could be something provided by a third-party vendor, or it might be something ad hoc that a landlord does on their own. But essentially, it's not that the landlord is charging for actual usage of the tenant. It's that the tenant is being charged some share of the total building costs for energy or water. Under current law, except in Montgomery County, tenants have no statutory right to access the information or even the calculation behind these charges. They don't have the right to see the underlying data for the entire building, for that matter. And these things can be very important to tenants when they're trying to challenge the charges that they're receiving each month. And this bill always reminds me of a tenant of mine in Baltimore City a few years ago. I came to her apartment in a 5-story building. I visited her. Her home was freezing. And I asked her, is the heat not working? And she said, it's not that it's not working. It's that I stopped using the heat during the day to cut down on my costs. And then I had to tell her the unfortunate truth, which was, you're still going to get a high utility cost every month because it's an allocated charge. And she didn't really understand that. And her whole building was actually mobilize to try and figure this out. That's one of the reasons why this bill, House Bill 86, is so important. It gives the tools to tenants as well as to prospective tenants so that when they're looking at signing a lease, they'll understand what they're getting themselves into. So for all these reasons, PJC recommends a favorable report on House Bill 86.
Okay, who's here with the Maryland Legal Aid?
I think the culprit is me.
Okay,
Chairman Barber.
Gregory, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As the chairman has stated, my name is Gregory Countess. I'm with Maryland Legal Aid. As many of you are familiar, and those who are not, Legal Aid is a statewide public interest law firm that represents individuals in housing cases and expungements, public benefits, and other sort of matters that affect poor and low income people. Back in 2020, in May of 2020, as a matter of fact, Maryland Legal Aid was approached by a group of tenants who live in a multi-family apartment building in Baltimore. The apartment building had rodents and insect infestation, and there were other sorts of conditions, including those that would affect safety of residents if in fact there was a fire in the building. The building was not licensed. This was a violation of the law, that is Baltimore City law. The building also, some of the residents there did not have leases. This is also a violation of the law. The tenants were in a situation where the landlord knew that they could not use the failure to pay rent statute to get possession of the premises, and instead said that its mode of recovering the property would be tenant holding over actions. This scared tenants because they recognized that the landlord could not collect the rent, and so they wanted to form a tenant council. To their efforts to do so were met with threats by the landlord. So that this bill, this transparency, House Bill 86, and the transparency position of provisions are very important for residents. And for that reason, we would ask that this committee vote favorably on it.
Okay, thank you so much. Carissa Hatfield with, I think, the Homeless Persons Representation Project. That's what HPRP is, right?
Yes, that's correct, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. As stated, my name is Carissa Hatfield, and I am a housing justice staff attorney with the Homeless Persons Representation Project. As the chairman stated, we do try to go by HPRP in the public to try to keep that mouthful down a little bit. We serve tenants in Baltimore City and Montgomery County in failure to pay rent and other landlord-tenant matters. And we are here in support of HB 86, as we have been for the last two sessions. And thank you to Delegate Stewart for introducing it once again. I do want to speak to the provisions related to survivors of stalking, as well as intimate partner violence and sexual assault. Obviously, I think it is common sense that the protections in the law be extended to survivors of stalking. As an attorney who formerly worked in intimate partner violence issues for multiple years, it makes sense that these crimes also be covered because they also relate to the safety of the home and the safety of where someone lays their head every night. I think the other thing to emphasize here is that this bill would allow for survivors to use other means to claim their status and be able to move from their homes. I just want to bring to the committee that in 2020, 22,891 intimate partner violence crimes were reported to police, but only 10,310 protective orders were filed in that same year, which means many survivors are not using that system because they do not find it effective for themselves for whatever reason that might be. and allowing them the opportunity to use other systems such as counselors and intimate partner violence programs that can lend their expertise to these survivors and to their need to move to a safer location is vital. That is just one reason why HPRP supports House Bill 86. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Nibber with MACO. I think you're new to the committee. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is DePaul Nibber. I'm representing the Maryland Association of Counties, also known as MACO, in support of HB 86. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a record number of individuals and families facing eviction. In response, counties have worked diligently to administer aid, adopt policies specific to avoiding evictions. And as you've heard, at least one county has adopted policies similar to those included in HB 86 regarding transparency and utility billing. Under HB 86, they will be allowed to stand. Moreover, local jurisdictions will have some autonomy to create their own transparency laws so long as they reach the floor created in HB 86 in the near future. For these reasons, we urge a favorable report on HB 86. Thank you.
Well done. Very quick testimony on a bill that has absolutely no sponsors so far. Next, Melanie Shapiro with Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. Melanie, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Melanie Shapiro, the Public Policy Director with the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. I think this might be my first time ever testifying in this committee, so I'll tell you a little bit about MNADV. We are the State Domestic Violence Coalition. We bring together victim service providers, allied professionals, and concerned individuals for the common purpose of reducing intimate partner and family violence and its harmful effects on our citizens. I would like to thank Delegate Stewart for this important piece of legislation and working with the domestic violence community to ensure that the language can best benefit the victims that we advocate on behalf of. HB 86 is the exact type of legislation and policy that is needed to support domestic violence victims and survivors as they attempt to escape potentially life-threatening violence. Leaving is in fact the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence, and this includes the risk of physical harm and even homicide. There's also a risk of homelessness, with 38% of domestic violence victims experiencing homelessness at some point in their lives. The provisions of HB 86 that allow a victim of domestic violence to terminate their lease are imperative as they seek safety. The lease termination provisions address the economic instability faced by victims of domestic violence and allow them to seek safe housing away from their abuser without the burden of an existing lease. The definition of qualified third party is consistent with the law defining eligibility for Maryland's address confidentiality program that is available for victims of domestic violence. Many survivors of domestic violence, as well as sexual assault, do not seek peace or protective orders, but they do, however, seek the services of, for example, the comprehensive domestic violence service providers that MNADV represents or a medical provider. So relief should not be limited to only those victims that seek a protective order or peace order. Allowing a qualified third party to provide documentation that an individual is seeking their services because of the abuse they have suffered is also victim-centered while balancing the need for sufficient documentation, as well as the stalking provisions refer back to the family law definition with the sponsor's amendments of abuse, which is consistent with current law and reflects all the forms of domestic violence that are experienced. For all those reasons, we urge a favorable report on HB 86 bill sponsors amendments.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to Aaron Greenfield and then to one other person. He signed up favorable with amendments, and then there's another favorable, and then we'll go to questions after that. Aaron, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. Aaron Greenfield here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association, whose membership consists of owners and managers with 210,000 rental housing homes in over 958 apartment communities in the state. I want to thank Delegate Stewart for remaining open to our amendments. We do come before the committee favorable with amendments, and you have our written testimony. I'll do this as quickly as I can. Those amendments include the following 7. On page 3, line 16, the term "the elements," we ask that that be defined. It's unclear what the elements refer to. On page 3, line 28, we would request that you strike meter reading dates, billing dates, and due dates by utility. In some jurisdictions like Baltimore City, for example, housing providers are not informed of when meter reading dates occur. Billing dates and other due dates tend to be inconsistent. While we appreciate the where practicable language that the delegate has put in, we are unclear if that fully addresses the challenge. And as a result, we question whether we're able to comply. On page 4, line 2, and on page 4, line 14, we would ask that the resident request the bill in writing within 7 days. On page 5, lines 33 through 36, we ask that you strike in its entirety the security deposit language. The provision is cumbersome. The tenant already has the current right to request this documentation under 8203. And under 8203E1, a security deposit must be returned within 45 days. And we're concerned that this provision will compromise that. Also, this provision effectively nullifies the dispute mechanism that's in current law. And then quickly, Mr. Chairman, on page 10, line 5, we ask that after inspect, we put within 48 hours or dates specified by the landlord and tenant. The current provision as drafted suggests the landlord must inspect right away. And then similarly on page 12, line 15, ask with a date certain. For those reasons, we request a favorable with amendments vote. Thank you. Report.
Okay, Marvin's got some work. Jared Shabline with the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus. Jared, welcome back to the committee. Jared. All righty then. It appears that
it looks like he didn't sign up correctly. I don't know if he meant to give written and just didn't sign up, but he's not listed to give oral testimony today.
Oh, okay. Well, all righty then. You're right. I misread that. It's none. Okay. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We will proceed to the next bill, which is, nobody's, a lot of written testimony. House Bill 117. Vaughn, you're up again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Vaughn Stewart. This is House Bill 117. So HB 117 allows a cooperative housing corporation to include in its governing documents a requirement for each member to maintain a member insurance policy on the member's unit. So for you all that are not Chairman Holmes, a housing cooperative or a co-op is a type of residential housing option. And a co-op is technically a corporation whereby the owners do not own their units outright. Instead, each resident is a shareholder in the corporation based in part on the relative size of the unit they live in. So the rationale for this bill is essentially that it will reduce a free rider problem wherein some shareholders hold insurance and others don't. By requiring shareholders to carry insurance, co-op boards can also help resolve potential conflicts that might arise between co-op members and also between a member and the building itself. Since the deadline for submitting testimony on Friday, there have been a ton of discussions about this bill between my office, the Community Associations Institute, and the Office of the Attorney General. And I'm very pleased to report to y'all that we have had a meeting of the minds and we have reached a consensus version of this bill. So I'll be introducing in a matter of days, a sponsor amendment that reflects this compromise. And today, I think you'll hear from my constituent, Cheryl Katzman, who will talk about the impetus for the legislation. And then you'll hear from Robin from CAI, who will explain the sponsor amendment and explain this compromise that we've come up with. Other than that, I very much appreciate the time that all the stakeholders have given me to craft some amendments, and I urge a favorable report.
All righty then. Thank you so much. Let's go to S. Katzman. I can't remember what your first name is, but
hi there. It's Cheryl Katzman.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm a resident of Leisure World. I am the president of the Leisure World Advocacy resident advocacy organization known as Just Us. I took this issue to Delegate Stewart, asking that he do exactly what we are discussing here today, and that is introduce this bill. I am the resident amongst 897 others units, members of the co-op known as Montgomery Mutual here in Leisure World. Last August, the Leisure World Community Corporation took out a master policy with a $50,000 deductible. And what that caused was the co-op members of this community were then forced, by virtue of the Co-op Association Board of Directors motion, to incur a $50,000 deductible on a insurance policy, on their home insurance policy, in the event of their, if an event, an insurable event took place that was deemed to be their responsibility due to negligence or misuse of their cooperative unit. Unlike condo associations, the cooperative is by membership, whereas with a condo association, as you all probably know, you have a deed to your unit. The Co-op Act does not address any protection for the cooperative members, unlike the Condo Act, which took effect last year, where the maximum deductible on an insurance policy that the condo owner could be held responsible for was $10,000 as a deductible. In the Cooperative Act, there is nothing, no mention whatsoever about insurance, about a.
If you could wrap up your testimony, the committee would appreciate that.
Sure. So this issue requires some protection for co-op members. Delegate Stewart and I have discussed what Robin will be bringing to your attention, that being the necessity to change some of the language in this act.
Okay.
Which I would appreciate, once that takes place, your vote in favor of Delegate Stewart's bill. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Robin, welcome back to the committee. You are signed up in opposition, but now you're going to tell us why you're not precisely in opposition, right?
I am, and thank you. I've met with the committee on numerous occasions. I want to thank you, Chair Barbie and Vice Chair Stein. I am Robin Manoogian. I'm an insurance agent for many, many years and a 14-year member of the Community Associations Institute Legislative Action Committee. So when this bill came before us initially, I was not happy to see that the bill was attempting to shift primacy of a master policy onto the unit owner, or in this case, the shareholder of a cooperative unit. I have since had subsequent conversations with both the Consumer Protection Office of the AG's office, that would be Karen Strawn, and then our bill sponsor, Vaughn Stewart. And we are looking for a favorable report on this bill, however, with amendments. The bill as it stands right now would require the shareholder to carry insurance on the unit. That is not the intent of the bill. We would then ask, instead of carrying any property insurance, as the bill directs right now, to have the shareholder simply carry liability insurance. And then we would want, while any of these changes, amendments to the shareholders' documents would require a certain percentage, as is directed in the existing governing documents, I'd like to see that reinforced by at least a 51% majority of the shareholders. For those reasons, I am amending my testimony. We would support with amendments and ask for your favorable report.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that does it for people offering testimony. I see a number of hands up for questions, so I think the first hand goes to, hold on. Ann Healy, and then Delegate Love, and then Delegate Lehman in that order. Ann.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to ask the sponsor if you have been in touch with the Greenbelt Co-op, the GHI. It is one of the largest in the state, and it's in my district. So I want to make sure that anything affecting co-ops, they have a chance to weigh in. If you have not, I will reach out to them.
Yeah, I have not, Delegate Healy, but that's a great point. And actually, I'm extremely familiar with that community and the co-op board because, as I may have told you before, my mom actually lives in Greenbelt and is a co-op member within GHI. So I actually have spoken with them before about issues regarding my mom. So I am happy to shoot them an email or give them a call this afternoon. But that's a great point. Thank you.
Okay, next, Delegate Lehman. Mary, if you can unmute.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, and thank you, Delegate Stewart, for bringing this bill. It's really interesting. So Delegate Healy is great minds think a lot alike. Greenbelt is my old stomping grounds. And I was curious just about the question of given GHI and cooperative communities elsewhere in the state, is anyone or you or anyone else aware of this issue coming up in other cooperative communities? And it's just interesting to me that it never has before. Maybe I should be asking that of the insurance industry representative.
Yeah, Robin is probably better positioned to answer the question. So I'll defer to her.
So thank you. Delegate Stein may recall in 2012, we drafted a similar law and passed that law, allowing a board of a condominium association to amend its documents with a 51% majority to require its owners to carry insurance. I'm a little bit troubled by this one, and that was the initial reaction that I had and why I opposed the bill. What we don't want to do is shift the primacy of the master policy. I know that in the discussions that we've had, there was an issue of a free rider program or problem where an owner may be getting something where they necessarily aren't paying into the economics of the situation. I don't see that to be an issue. Just like any other shareholder in a cooperative, the shareholder is going to pay their shareholder fees. Those fees go toward paying the insurance, which gives them insurable interest in the policy. So we don't want to necessarily shift the primacy onto the shareholder's own policy. And the reason behind limiting the insurance requirement not to property but to liability is in those cases where perhaps you have a behavioral based claim. Someone leaves an unattended candle burning, or they let their tub overflow. The differences in a co-op with a condo is that unit owners in a condo have maintenance responsibility of the components within that unit. Maybe they have to keep up their plumbing, they have to keep up their HVAC system. But in a cooperative, the cooperative itself owns everything in the unit. So we do not want to shift responsibility for ensuring those things for a shareholder who doesn't necessarily have maintenance responsibility for them. So Delegate, I do understand your concern, and that's why I had addressed the changes, as did the AG's office, to make this a liability-based requirement rather than a property.
Thank you. That was a lot more than I bargained for, but thank you. That's
okay.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks.
Okay, next, Delegate Holmes and then Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Robin.
Good to see you.
I want to make sure that I understand that the definition of the co-op versus the definition of the condo relevant to this insurance going now to liability has been addressed, because initially I had some serious concerns about this too, relevant to the different type of governing of the two entities. So now I'm not to understand that the liability insurance only is going to make this more like a renter's insurance type of policy for liability within that particular unit of the shareholder. Is that the way I'm to understand this?
That's accurate.
Okay. All right.
And I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated too.
Please do. Please do. Please do.
So, one of the things that we need to be aware of, or there's two things. It is difficult to prove negligence or misuse. So there is going to be a requirement of the association and perhaps its legal team to prove that the owner was truly negligent in the resulting claim. The other thing is that when you go after an owner's, or in this case, a shareholder's policy, liability losses are paid on an actual cash value basis. So the association may very well still have to address a claim through its master policy. One of the things that when we went after 11-114 and assigned deductible responsibility to condo owners, we did so based on point of origin. And we're going to be attacking this on House Bill 197. So you'll see me again in this committee. That's cross-filed with Senate Bill 145, which is Senator Kramer's bill. And that is going to be addressing deductible assignment to cooperative owners. And I'm still having difficulty with those bills because, again, you're assigning deductible responsibility. And in the case of people who may not have any maintenance responsibility, there's nuances that we need to consider when we're assigning liability when it comes to carrying insurance. Right now, we're just requiring that those shareholders carry liability insurance. There's a whole nother portion of this, and that's going to be proving that the loss that took place, the casualty damage that took place in that unit or that affected common areas or common elements was truly negligence or misuse of the unit.
Mr. Chair, if I could just have one more bite at the apple. Robin, another follow-up question is in reference to your last statement. If there is damage done to common area, well, it's not common area in the co-op, to common areas and to a apartment, and it is determined that the damage is, I don't know, pick an example, wiring throughout the entire building, would that assign responsibility to a particular leaseholder because of the wiring throughout the entire building, or would that be the entire co-op's responsibility?
So
I'm just using this as an example.
No, very good question. So if the wiring in question, and let's just call it aluminum wiring, which the insurance industry finds problematic, it gets hot, it causes fires.
That's right.
There are fixes to that, but not necessarily inexpensive ones. If there were a wiring loss, and it is the co-op's responsibility to maintain or replace that, I think that you would find the HO6 carrier, which is the cooperative owner's policy, you would find them rebuffing any claim. And the issue I have is, let's say that you've got a wiring problem and the owner is made aware of the wiring problem, but overloads a circuit. Is that misuse of the unit? Or does that go back to the cooperative's issue that they should have addressed their wiring problem to begin with? Because what is overload of a unit? Is it more than 2 plugs? Is it 3 strands of lights in a Christmas tree? These are all issues that really need to be looked at.
Okay, I'm going to suggest, Marvin, that these are in-depth issues that should probably be more appropriately discussed within the subcommittee. But
I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Delegate Love, then Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did I hear correctly that there will be both, if this bill were to pass, there would be both the master policy and then individual shareholders would have to have policies? And if I heard that correctly, wouldn't that add a significant amount of cost to a homeowner or a shareholder?
So yeah, the answer is yes. So the association would still maintain its master policy, which addresses casualty loss, damage to the units, and original specifications in those units. The owner, by way of my support with amendments, would carry liability coverage. The average HO6 policy, and that's the cooperative policy that the owner would carry, includes a minimum limit of $300,000 of liability insurance. These policies really are not terribly expensive. I would say on average, they're about $200 to $400 a year, and carrying that liability, which is a standard part of that policy, does not add any additional cost to that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Delegate Boyce.
I am so confused. So I just wanted to make sure I'm clear about this. If I already have property and I already have, let's say I have renter's insurance, the liability would be added to my renter's insurance, or the liability is a separate. So I would have two policies, essentially, my renter's insurance as well as this liability insurance.
Your renter's insurance would include liability within that. So remember, your renter's insurance would have a little bit of coverage for your personal property contents.
That's correct.
It should have loss of use, additional living expense, and that's for if there's a catastrophic loss and you can't live in the unit for a period of time. And then your liability, so that, let's say that you live on top of another neighbor and you overflow your tub and it goes down and damages their belongings. This is now, the attempt here is not just to address that you damage someone else below you and their personal belongings, but any damage that you might cause as a result of your misuse or negligent use of that unit. But it would be a portion of your renter's policy.
And I guess but is that something that is already existing in a renter's policy, or would have to be additionally added?
No, it's all automatically included. The minimum limit is $300,000.
So it may be increasing the limit per se, but in other words, this is not an additional cost.
So that's you raise a really good point. There are no limits that are mandated by this bill, and if that's something that you all would like, we can include language at a minimum of $300,000. I think what you're driving at is that you don't want the boards of these cooperatives to require a ridiculous amount of liability coverage so as to really shift primacy of that master policy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the perfect way to say it. I mean, it sounds like the liability should be complementary to the master policy, because you're going to make, suppose it's damages to your property, it's damages to someone else, but that's essentially damage to the entire property, which the two would have to merge together. I'm just making sure that the owner doesn't have to get two separate policies.
They don't, but you've raised a point that I had not considered. So let's say that an owner is, having a nice dinner and they leave candles, and then something happens, they leave the candles unattended, and they set $1 million fire. Do we really want that owner being responsible for the full million, or do we want some acceptable amount of liability there?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm pushing to. Thanks so much, Robin. I appreciate it.
Okay, Melissa Wells has the next and hopefully final question, so we can really take this up in subcommittee.
No pressure on me. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the bill sponsor. I guess, Robin, and I've been sitting here listening to you and reading the testimony and trying to process the testimony itself. I'm not a lawyer, so there's some language that's complicated to me, but I think really my question is trying to get to the crux of what's happening. And so there's two things, and I think Delegate Boyce just raised something that added another, is this what's going on in my head? But the first thing I want to ask is really kind of in more layman terms, is a concern that this bill as presented would cause somewhat of a domino effect, in which there is a lot of people, like the three Spider-Men, pointing at each other about who's liable for what, be it the co-op, the primary holder, the co-op unit holder, and insurance companies. Do you feel like that's what this is going to cause, this kind of a lot of chaos around who will be liable, who will pay what? That's what I'm trying to just grasp at the base level before this hearing is over.
The point you're making was the exact point that we made when we passed deductible responsibility to condos back in 2009. We wanted to take off the table having board members point their fingers at the people they live with. And so the way the deductible responsibility works in condos, it's purely by point of origination. It doesn't matter what you do. If you fail to maintain, if you set a fire, you're going to be responsible for the first 10,000. Liability coverage very rarely comes into play. The issue here, and I think that the impetus to the bill was a funding mechanism, because as I mentioned earlier, before you will come in the next couple of weeks, House Bill 197, which is being cross-filed with Senate Bill 145. That's going to attempt to put deductible responsibility onto a shareholder. The approach here is one that I have difficulty with, because as you point out, it requires the board to assign negligence or misuse to someone living in a cooperative association. There is another issue in whether the insurance carrier, the master policy carrier, has the right to subrogate or go after an owner or a shareholder. Typically, that's not how it happens. You think about yourself, if you live in a single family house and you accidentally set a fire or you allow your hot water heater to fail, you don't file a claim with your carrier and then expect them to come back and recover against you. And so it really goes outside the spirit of the master policy to not have these claims covered. Although, growing, I will tell you, the insurance industry is incredibly difficult right now. Premiums are on the rise, and what they're trying to do is get owners who are negligent in this case or misuse the unit to have some skin in the game without really taking away the primacy of the policy.
Okay, thank you. I think
did I confuse things or?
Well, you didn't confuse things. I think I have a better guidance of where to go in a subcommittee. So thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Okay, I see no further questions. Thank you very much, Robin. And thank you, Delegate Stewart. That'll conclude the public hearing on that bill. We will proceed to House Bill 101, Delegate Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I assume you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. As this committee well knows, under Maryland law, every time certain properties are rented to a new tenant, the landlord must comply with the lead risk reduction law and obtain a certificate of compliance from the Department of Energy, the Environment, MDE. However, from, I believe, the outset of that requirement, when that was first put into the law, we also provided that whether or not the landlord has complied with that law and has such a certificate may not be an issue of fact in a case seeking repossession of the property for failure to pay rent. Technology has now solved that problem. We now need to solve it legislatively. There are or will be, by the time, should this bill be enacted and take effect on June 1, as the bill proposes, there will be access online to the MDE records as to whether a property is in compliance. So there is no longer any reason why that data, that information, that certificate would not be available to resolve clearly and immediately when made available, the question as to whether the landlord has complied with the law and thus can seek repossession of the property. This bill has been before the committee before. We believe that the virtual access problem has been resolved. That is, the system either is or will be up and running by the time of the effective date of this law. I know the committee has dealt with other legislation that touches upon this issue. It doesn't matter to me whether my bill moves or another bill moves, but for the sake of the safety of the people who live in these properties, to ensure that the law is being followed, that a property is in compliance with the lead risk reduction law. That information is now readily available to all the parties. Therefore, it should no longer be unable to be used as an issue of fact. It is a basic fact in a hearing for payment of rent. I would urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay, before I go on to the next witness, Delegate Frazier Hidalgo, you're going to take over. I'm going to have to join our vice chair and the chair and vice chair of the Rules Committee and go to the Rules Committee. So Dave, please take over.
Thank you. Good luck.
Okay.
Okay. Delegate Rosenberg, where were we? Were you in the middle of answering a question? Finishing up your testimony?
I finished up my testimony, awaiting any questions if there are any.
Okay, it looks like we have a lot of organizations that are favorable. So let's just go down the witness list. The next one for favorable will be Carissa Hatfield. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Please, 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, delegates, and thank you for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 101. As previously stated, I'm with the Homeless Persons Representation Project, or HPRP, which provides representation to tenants in Baltimore City and Montgomery County. And we are here once again to support House Bill 101 and Delegate Rosenberg in the lead risk reduction licensing requirements bill. House Bill 101 targets lead licensing requirements. It is similar to House Bill 174, which will be heard later today, but instead of targeting only rental requirements, it does target lead licensing requirements. We believe this is essential. Landlords, when providing a complaint to the court, have to assert to the court under penalty of perjury that they do in fact have the proper lead licensing in order to proceed with their case. This bill provides that landlords actually have to put their money where their mouth is and show the court that they do in fact have this lead licensing that they're required to have in order to get a judgment against the tenant. What this would do would mean that the landlord would have to show proof in a trial that they do in fact have this licensing. And if they cannot show it at that time and contest that they do in fact have it and are in compliance, the court can grant a continuance to allow that to be demonstrated. We want to ensure that there's accountability for landlords within the rental court system, and that this isn't just being used as a means of debt collection, but rather is being used as a means of seriously reaching out to the tenants and attempting to get there to be some kind of resolution where possession of the property is not just outright granted to the landlord, even if they're not meeting the law. In this circumstance, if the landlord can prove that they have the lead license, then they can proceed with the judgment. But if they don't, then they can't, because under the law, they shouldn't be able to. We would therefore ask that if for a favorable report on House Bill 101. Thank you.
Thank you. And it appears that I missed Zafar from the Public Justice Center. Zafar, are you still here?
I am. Thank you, Delegate, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is Zafar Shah from Public Justice Center. As stated before, we're a legal services organization providing legal assistance to over 600 renters throughout the state. Last year, we have supported this bill for a number of years, and I don't want to belabor the history, but the history is very important. I know that many of you have heard this bill several years in a row. The question in this bill is, landlords who don't comply with the lead risk law still are using specialized court procedures for eviction. So they can collect rent regardless of their compliance. So why would they bother complying? And that's really the fundamental question that this bill tackles. This was also a bill that came out of a 2016 summer study looking at this issue. And at that time, we came up with this kind of consensus approach. Landlords were hesitant, I think, about what might happen if they show up trying to show that they have a lead certificate at trial, but the case is contested. They don't have a continuance. And so what might happen is they might lose cases automatically. So we agreed to put a continuance provision in the bill. This bill passed 2 years in a row in 2017 and 2018. And then, it didn't succeed in JPR, but coming back the next year, landlords said, well, now we need to have a new database that we can rely on every time we go to court. Well, now MDE has provided that database. The LRCA database is now online. I've provided a link in my written testimony. But now, again, my colleagues in the industry are frustrated by a new issue, which is COVID-19 delays in some courts in Maryland, not all of them. And they're going to tell you that this bill can't pass with a 10-day continuance because of those delays and because this legislature passed a 10-day pre-filing notice last session that became effective in October. But that notice, which is given to a tenant before there's even a court case, is distinguishable. It would not resolve or help a court resolve a contested trial issue. And that's why there is this continuance provision in the bill to allow a judge to see the best evidence in order to resolve contested facts. Just a couple points of clarification on this bill. It does not require the court to cross-reference eviction information with MDE data. It does not require lead certificates or rental licenses, for that matter, to be attached to the court complaint. It does not require clerks to make judicial rulings that only a judge should make. And it does not mandate how judges should rule on the case. It simply asks that the landlord provide their burden of proof. And I'll close there. We support House Bill 101.
Thank you. Next, we have the Maryland Legal Aid, but I don't see a name. Is anybody here from Maryland Legal Aid?
Yeah, I think that'll be me. Thank you. Hi, my name's Harrison. Sure. Hi, my name's Harrison Mont. I'm a staff attorney at Maryland Legal Aid. Maryland Legal Aid, we represent low income residents of Maryland throughout the state on a number of issues, housing being one of the most common. And, speaking as an attorney for low income people, we see a lot of times these places that are not compliant with their lead or licensing requirements. These types of landlords target low income people, people who really don't have any other place to go. And we've seen the terrible health impacts of that, especially with lead and with young children, and how they are impacted for the rest of their lives through these kinds of violations. And the landlords are incentivized to do that because really they are still able to evict and collect rent even with these types of properties. So there's not really good enforcement to stop them from doing so. And like what was previously said, this bill doesn't really change the law. It just makes sure that it's being enforced. It makes sure landlords prove that they're complying with the rules so that they can benefit from the court system. And in doing so, it incentivizes landlords to provide safe, habitable properties that are in compliance and create, properties for all types of tenants that are safe and a good place for people to grow up without any kind of health hazards. So for those reasons, on behalf of Maryland Legal Aid, we ask that you support this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mott. Next, from Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, Ruth Ann Norton.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair and Committee. You have gotten really good expertise from Zephyr Shaw and the others that have testified here, as well as Delegate Rosenberg. I will say, as someone who was a critical part of helping to draft the base law that this is built around, The intent was to make it effective in the courts. The changes that Delegate Rosenberg is proposing are necessary. The studies that have gone through on housing court with the deficits as it is, about 60% of the tenants handicapped in their ability to simply have the effectuation of the law in rent court as intended. So we urge the committee to adopt this bill successfully. I believe MDE has done all of the work asked for it by the owners. And I think as Mr. Shaw laid out, everybody has met every hurdle. This is now an attempt to make the Maryland lead risk reduction law continuing to be effective and accessible. Without this, it is not as accessible or as effective as the legislature has intended. And so we urge the adoption of the law as the bill as written. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next goes to Aaron Greenfield, Maryland Multi-Housing Association. Aaron, you're still here? There you are.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Aaron Greenfield on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. You have our written testimony, and we come with favorable with amendments. We have three specific concerns. The first is that a failure to pay rent proceeding. We would like the ability to provide an electronic version of the forms before the court. My understanding from Delegate Rosenberg is he intends to offer a similar amendment, and we have suggested language. It would mirror, quite frankly, the language in House Bill 174 that Delegate Lehman has put in, and we appreciate her for putting that electronic proof into the bill. Our second concern, which thank you, Mr. Shaw, for raising on our behalf, is the significant delays in the failure to pay rent process. Not only do we now have an additional 10-day notice, but we have delays in the docket process where in some jurisdictions, you could sign a lease effective February 1 and not pay rent for that full 1-year term and still not come before a court on a failure to pay rent action during that 1-year term. There are significant delays in the district court process, and for those reasons, on page 5, line 19, and on page 7, line 19, we would urge that you strike the 10 days. And then lastly, there's just a bit of confusion with the term direct evidence. The bill uses that term. We ask that you strike the term direct on page 5, lines 22 and 26, simply because direct evidence is confusing in this scenario, since the bill will already require the lead certificate at trial, which is evidence in and of itself, and we're not clear what the distinction is between direct evidence versus evidence. For those reasons, we come to the committee and request a report that's favorable with those amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greenfield. Next, but not last, Bill Castelli, you're up. Good to see you, Bill.
Good to see you too, Mr. Chairman, and the committee as well. Bill Castelli with the Maryland Realtors. We're supporting the bill with amendment, and it really addresses just one very specific issue, the term valid. You'll also see a couple of other bills talking about presenting evidence of like a rental registration if you're required to get a rental registration. This bill uses the term a valid registration or license offered by municipality or county. And there is another bill that talks about not having, for example, like a temporary license. We are concerned about that issue. We think that a temporary license should be a valid license. Oftentimes, local county might give a temporary license while their inspector goes out to inspect. We think the real issue is if you went and got your license after you already had the tenant in place, that should be the issue for the court to consider. But if you got the license, whether it's temporary or permanent prior to that, that should still be an opportunity for the court to look at that and still move forward with that court case. So that's the one issue that we were raising. And with that, we would support with amendments.
Okay, thank you. I think we have the remainder of the witnesses are all written, so we're going to go to questions. I saw Delegate Boyce's hand up earlier. Were your questions answered, Delegate Boyce?
No, but I'll ask, and maybe be silly, but I know Delegate Rosenberg, oftentimes when individuals do go to court, the onus, I guess, on proof usually falls either on the tenant or the landlord. Do you speculate that because this is now on, now the database is up and live, that the judge, do you have a thought about whether or not the judge is also willing to look that up? Because that is you know, that's kind of the biggest concern. Before, you could say that you had something, or sometimes, for instance, with the city, as you know, there was a delay in rental license. So like, I may have it, but it may not be in the system. So I just want to discuss the onus of proof, and whether or not we know the judges, whether or not the judge would be willing or will either ask for it to be pulled up or would pull it up themselves.
Well, if I may, Chief Judge Morrissey is not president, but if I could ask Zephyr Shaw if he could, if it's okay with the committee, if he could respond to that, since he is a practicing attorney in this area and I am not.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Delegate Rosenberg. And to the question, I think that the judiciary has opposed in concept that judges should look up database information if the court is doing basically the proffering of evidence on its own. That would be improper. So, you know, advocates for tenants are not proposing that the judges do that. And I think that the place where this bill is now, several years into it, is that landlords who perhaps don't know about this law once it passes would come to court, and once apprised that they need to carry that burden to show the lead certificate, for instance, they can just look it up on their iPad or their phone and present that as the direct evidence of a valid lead inspection certificate. I agree, and Public Justice Center agrees with Maryland Multi-Housing Association that a PDF that shows the valid date and all that information the MD has on a certificate would be direct evidence. And we don't oppose the amendment being asked for, which would just specify that electronic evidence is good evidence.
Thank you so much. So again, it's just given the onus would be on, of course, either party to bring that up electronically.
It would be the onus on the landlord specifically as their burden. So for instance, when the plaintiff presents their case, they're presenting that probably
Sure.
at the outset.
But the plaintiff could also bring up something to show that it doesn't exist.
Oh, the defendant, yeah, the
Yes.
renter
Oh,
could do
I'm
that.
sorry, yes, the defendant, I'm sorry, yes.
No, and that's
Yeah.
a really good point, because one of the changes in this bill, which Delegate Rosenberg has really fought for, is to remove the language, that one line in Real Property 8-401 that says that this may not be an issue of fact. And so that has prevented defendant renters from raising the issue.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Zephyr. Any more questions? All right, Delegate Rosenberg, it's wonderful to see you in our committee. Thank you very much.
I'll be back. Thank you.
Hearing on HB 101, and now we'll go to HB 0134, Delegate Hill.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee. And I think that for this hearing, you're being visited by some judiciary committee members as well. So I wanted to acknowledge their presence if they're here. And if not, I guess I'll have another hearing in front of them.
They have been notified, so they're here.
All right, thank you. So first of all, happy New Year and thank you all. It's good to be here in front of you again. I'm here to ask your support for HB 134, failure to pay rent proceedings and sealing of court records, which is a bill that this committee passed last year. And it does two things. It seals eviction filing records if the filing does not actually result in an action against the tenant. So if, for instance, the debt has been resolved before the hearing, or the tenant has paid the findings, and I forget the legal term, for it, then their record can be sealed. And the real issue, it helps to ensure that the filing of a failure to pay action does not carry the same long-term potentially detrimental effects of an actual finding of a failure to pay action or eviction itself. And as I noted, this committee passed it last year, and the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee affirmed their support for it had it come to a vote in committee, but time ran out. In addition, the bill prohibits a landlord from increasing the rent of a tenant solely because of a failure to pay rent judgment against the tenant. So under current law, the consequences for paying late are the same as the consequences for not paying at all. And that certainly is not just, and it's not likely that that was the intention when our eviction laws were first propagated. It's also counterproductive from a behavioral standpoint. That's not how you induce people to do better, by punishing the same whether they do better or not. And it's not good from a societal standpoint. There are a few amendments. I've offered two. One is a co-sponsor amendment, but the other actually removes a provision that the committee put on the bill that essentially precludes tenants that are receiving federal subsidies from being able to benefit from the sealing of their filing of eviction records. My understanding was this was put on because it was thought by the committee that this was necessary to comply with some federal regulations around Section 8 housing and HUD housing. But if you look at the supporting testimony that's been submitted, there is clear evidence that this is not necessary. So in addition to frankly being totally counter to the purpose of the bill, it is not necessary and it's harmful. So we're asking for that amendment to be accepted and strip away that section of the bill. The next thing is that there are also amendments offered by some of the supporters to basically better define what sealing of the record means. And I have no objection and actually think that this is probably an excellent idea. And then the Maryland Multi-Housing Association, which worked with me and the other sponsors of the bill in drafting it last year and supported it both last year and this year, have asked that an amendment extending the time after resolution of a case from 60 to 90 days before the record can actually be sealed. Last year, I agreed to move it from 30 to 60 days. As the bill comes into you this year, it looks like the drafter stuck with the 30, and I did not catch that. So I have no objection to 60 days. I really would leave it up to the housing advocates and to the committee as to whether going to 90 days is really appropriate for the purposes of this bill. And finally, I would say that the only opposition I see today is from the Maryland Judicial Conference, and they raise a number of operational issues. I would note that they did not approach me last year about the bill, nor have they approached me this year about the bill. So there's been no opportunity to discuss their objections or to discuss compromises or remedies, nor have they offered any remedies. Since this bill is prospective, it does not require the sealing of records automatically from the past. And we have experience of sealing of criminal records, and that seems to be something that the judiciary has managed to figure out how to do well.
You can wrap it up, please, Delegate.
Okay, I think that it is unlikely that that you should, find good cause to support their objections to the bill. So I ask that again, you support the bill with the amendments offered in consideration also of the Maryland Housing Coalition's, Multi-Housing Coalition's amendment as well, or association. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go through witnesses and then we'll go to questions. Our first witness from Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, Michael Donnelly. Michael, you here?
Yes, thank you, members of the committee. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Donnelly, and I'm testifying on behalf of the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition in support of House Bill 134. In my day-to-day work, I speak with tenants experiencing problems with their housing situations. Many of these tenants face eviction for failure to pay rent, but I also speak to people struggling to find affordable housing because of the presence of these filings on their records. Property management companies frequently outsource court filings to other firms. So a tenant can notify management that their rent will be late and come to an agreement, but they'll still receive a summons. They might miss a payment and subsequently pay the rent and the late fees that are owed, but they'll still receive a summons as well. Tenants can also have valid defenses to failure to pay rent actions, notably that their rent is in a court-administered escrow account because the landlord has failed to make repairs. So even without a judgment for possession, these filings remain on people's records, showing up in background checks and tenant screening reports when they seek new housing. These reports frequently lack complete information and aren't strictly regulated under fair credit reporting laws. The presence of these filings on judicial records can have a strong negative impact on people's ability to find adequate housing at affordable prices. They can result in increased monthly rents or security deposit obligations, or people might have their applications denied outright. HB 134 addresses this problem by prohibiting rent increases solely because a judgment was entered for failure to pay rent, and by allowing the removal of failure to pay rent filings from records if a judgment for possession is not entered, or if the right of redemption is exercised and 12 months have passed. This will help people obtain adequate housing at affordable prices, rather than having filings which didn't result in evictions, leading to increased rents or denied applications in the future. For these reasons, we ask for a favorable report on HB 134, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michael. Aaron, Maryland Multi-Housing Association. Aaron, there you are.
Yeah. Hi, Mr. Chairman. I'll be super brief. And Aaron Greenfield on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. Again, you have our written testimony. We are favorable with amendments. I think one point of clarification, I don't believe this bill came before Environment and Transportation last session. I think it was before the Judiciary Committee instead, but I could be wrong on that note. But as Delegate Hill indicated, and I thank Delegate Hill for taking the time to work with us, we do request that you strike the 60 days and insert 90 days on page 2, line 22, to give a prospective housing provider a little more time in assessing a record, and particularly in the event that there was a right of redemption last year. For those reasons, we just request a favorable report with that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, from the Maryland Legal Aid, Mr. Mont, are you here to testify?
No, that's Gregory Countess, delegate. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So Gregory Countess, I testified a little earlier, from Maryland Legal Aid. And that our law firm handles cases from all across the state. I'll also be attempt to be brief. This bill would be particularly apt coming off of this pandemic, or being in the midst of it. We have had, we've seen multiple cases where tenants have paid past due rent, and eviction filings were filed in any event. And even if these cases didn't result in an eviction, they still pose a problem for tenants who wish to rent their next apartments. We've also seen, and if it's any doubt about whether or not these filings have any impact upon the ability of people to become housed, I mean, we've seen it. I've had a case of a 72-year-old woman who, though she was did not have failure to pay rent actions filed against her, so this bill wouldn't actually help her. She did suffer because, as a result of a breach of lease action that was filed. Originally, there was a judgment against her. We represented her and came back in and got that judgment vacated. Later, she applied for apartment housing. She had perfect credit. She had lived in her prior apartment complex for about 20 years, and yet she was rejected. And so this bill is really important to keep people housed. And so for those reasons, we urge a favorable report.
Great, thank you very much. Next, our next witness from the Public Justice Center, Cherise Liu. You're here?
Yes, I'm here.
There you are.
Hi. Good afternoon, and thank you to the sponsor and the committee for giving us this opportunity. As you stated, my name is Cherise Liu, and I am an attorney with the Public Justice Center's Human Right to Housing Unit. As you know, we stand with tenants to protect and expand their rights to safe, habitable, and affordable housing. PJC supports HB 0134 with amendments that should include federally subsidized tenants in the same manner that it seeks to protect unsubsidized tenants. As a housing attorney, I see hundreds of failure to pay rent cases dismissed due to full payment by the tenant or an amicable conclusion for both parties. In our current system, these same tenants are often prevented from securing safe and affordable housing due to the filing of the complaint alone, no matter the outcome of these cases. These tenants are often forced to pay higher security deposits and even higher rent for less desirable rental properties because dismissals are not currently sealed. HUD has issued guidance to public housing authorities on lowering barriers in its PHA Guide to Modifying Tenant Screening and Eligibility Policies and Procedures. HUD recognizes that modifications such as this one to certain procedures will remove barriers that families face when seeking subsidized housing and housing assistance. Amending HB 0134 to include federally subsidized individuals and families is a much needed positive step that will reduce a major barrier to safe and affordable housing for so many. Again, PJC supports HB 034 with the amendments proposed by the sponsor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next on our list, Bill Castelli. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill Castelli with the Maryland Realtors. Our point of contention with the bill, and first we want to thank Delegate Hill for reaching out to us. We were opposed to the bill last year. We were more directive in what our concern is this year, and we're supporting the bill with an amendment, specifically trying to address the 24-month period of shielding, which we would recommend to be a 24-month period. Our issue with that is a 24-month period gives a better sense of whether this was a one-time factor that a tenant was experiencing, maybe a job loss or something like that, or a pattern that might raise concerns with a land or a property owner. So we think a 24-month period ceiling makes more sense. You know, certainly our property managers are real estate licensees. They have a fiduciary duty to ensure that they've reviewed the tenants who are applying. And I will also mention too, that certainly with the shortage of supply of affordable rental housing in the state, tenants with perfect rental histories are struggling as well. So we do think that, a tenant who's got a great history is also in need of housing too. And we certainly don't think someone who's been able to keep a very clear history should be penalized anymore. But we do think that a 2-year period allows property managers and others the right and the ability to make sure that they find the best tenant and the best fit for that property. And with that change, we recommend a favorable report.
Thank you very much. Let's open it up to questions. I think those are all the oral witnesses. I saw Delegate Love's hand earlier. That's down, so we'll go with Delegate Terrazzo.
Thank you. Mr. Castelli, can you just explain what you mean by 2 years? 2 years, I don't understand what would be 2 years.
So there's 2 provisions in the bill, specifically the sealing of the record. If you take a look on page 2, so this is an instance where maybe a judgment of possession was issued, but the tenant actually was able to make payment before they were evicted, so they were able to stay in the property. In instances like that, a tenant can apply for sealing of record if they've had a clean record for over a year between that time.
And you want it to be 2 years?
Correct. Yeah.
If they've only had one late payment.
Correct.
And what would you say about some of the things that I've heard about is folks that get their paychecks very close in time to when their rent is due. So they become relatively chronic, even if they're late, always at 10 days, let's say. But then they have a record every month.
I can see that as being an issue, but I do know that there are, so our members deal a lot with very small landlords. And I can tell you that I can't remember a time where a property manager has talked to me where a landlord hasn't been flexible with that. I'm certain there are instances of that happening, and but I know with the folks that I've talked to, they have not mentioned that specifically. Now, these are typically owners of probably less than 3 units of rental property, many times just 1 or 2.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I think Ms. Hatfield had also signed up for testimony.
Yeah, I may have missed it.
Yes, we skipped over her. She's
okay. Please, then.
Thank you. May I proceed?
Please. I'm sorry.
That not a problem. Just glad to be able to speak on this issue. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Carissa Hatfield. Once again, I'm with the Homeless Persons Representation Project. I do want to thank Delegate Hill for the opportunity to testify on this bill and for bringing this bill back to the House this year. We submitted our testimony favorable with amendment and had the opportunity last week to work with the delegate and are happy and very satisfied with the amendments she has proposed today. I do want to take this opportunity to speak to some of the amendments that are being proposed by MMHA, such as the 90-day provision for tenants who have a dismissal and the 24-month proposal for tenants who redeem the property and can prove their right of redemption. There is no necessary provision to move 60 days to 90 days, except to give landlords more time to look into a tenant's record when they haven't done something wrong. The 60-day provision would apply to tenants who either have a dismissal or have prevailed at trial for one reason or another. Their landlord doesn't have a rental license, doesn't have a lead license, has poor conditions in the property. And those are the reasons the tenant has prevailed at trial, or they've paid the rental balance and the case has been dismissed. Additionally, for tenants who have a judgment against them, and have the opportunity to redeem the property, the court itself does not look back at a tenant's rental record or the number of times that they've had a judgment against them past 1 year. So the opportunity for landlords to look back 2 years isn't in line with what the court is currently doing. We would ask that this bill be forwarded with the amendments proposed by the bill sponsor and maintaining the 60-day and 12-month provisions provided by the bill currently. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from the committee.
Thank you. And Chris, I'm so sorry that I had skipped over you. I want to thank those members that blew up my phone to remind me. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, I want to thank the members of the judiciary that came over, and you can head back to your committee, and we are going to move on to the last bill of the day, which is House Bill 174. Delegate Lehman, you are up.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I am happy to be batting cleanup today. I am presenting to you House Bill 174, repossession for failure to pay rent, and asking for your favorable report. HB 174 is a bill that requires landlords to submit original or electronic copies of a rental license in compliance with local laws when filing a complaint for repossession. So very briefly, by way of background, unlike previous versions of this bill that applied only to Baltimore City, that was a bill by Delegate Clark, or Prince George's and Anne Arundel counties. That was a bill put forward by me last year. HB 174 would be applicable statewide. Now in 2021, the local versions of this bill were actually before House Judiciary. They were combined with Delegate Rosenberg's lead certificate bill, passed Judiciary, passed the full House, never taken up in JPR. So this bill does four things. It first says that a landlord who files an eviction case based on a tenant's failure to pay rent cannot do so without demonstrating that the property is in compliance with local licensing and registration requirements. Secondly, the bill clarifies that a provisional license does not constitute adequate proof of compliance with local laws, and therefore it cannot support the eviction complaint. Third, it allows the landlord to present electronic copies of the license to satisfy the burden of proof. And I did work with Mr. Greenfield last year on that provision. Happy to include that. Finally, it prevents the court from entering a judgment in favor of a landlord who fails to demonstrate that these requirements have been met. HB 174 is needed because residential rental property licenses provide a certain level of assurance that a property is safe and habitable. Provisional licenses are typically issued before there is an inspection, and they may never actually trigger an inspection or the issuance of the actual license. This system is used heavily in Prince George's. It is not clear how many other jurisdictions actually use provisional licenses. I've asked many folks who don't seem to have the answer. I am willing to do follow-up with the legislative library to try and figure that out. So absent an inspection, that means there's not a guarantee that appliances work, that doors and windows function the way they're supposed to, that there's adequate ventilation, and so on and so forth to prove that a property is actually safe for human habitation. So this bill will bring accountability in these failure to pay rent cases, not allow continuances based on hastily applied for provisional licenses, and therefore I believe it will help avoid putting tenants at risk of being in harmful living conditions. The premise of the bill is really simple, but I think it's powerful, and it says that landlords who fail to comply with local rental licensing requirements on the front end cannot evict tenants who they have no legal right to rent to in the first place. They must first prove that they have a license before moving to evict. And I will ask for your favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delegate. Our first witness, Zephyr, Public Justice Center.
Yes, thank you. Zephyr Shah from Public Justice Center for the record. And that was very well said by the sponsor. Again, much like with Delegate Rosenberg's House Bill 101, the central question when you look at this bill is—
Excuse me, Zephyr, could you put your camera on, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's okay.
So the central question would be, why are unlicensed landlords who are not legally operating their properties and may not be able to get those properties even up to code able to file eviction cases using a specialized proceeding, able to win judgments, and then use the powers of the sheriff to enforce those eviction orders? We have great jurisprudence on this issue. 10 years ago, the Court of Appeals held that these bad actors have no status as a claimant in a failure to pay rent action. And the court's underlying thesis there was that if a local jurisdiction requires licensing as a measure for public safety, then that actor who fails to have the license should not have the benefit of accessing these specialized proceedings. And yet here we are 10 going on 11 years later, and we still have landlords who are unlicensed able to freely use these specialized eviction proceedings. And it's because the court actually didn't tell the lower courts how to proceed, like who has the burden of proof. And so again, as with HB 101, this bill, HB 174, it specifies that the landlord has the burden of proof, that at trial, they will show that rental license. And if they can't carry that burden, then the judge will do what judges do. In most cases, they'll dismiss or enter judgment for the tenant. So this is a simple bill. I want to reiterate it again that like 101, this bill does not ask clerks to do judicial ministerial roles. It does not ask judges to send data to one place or another. The burden to show the license is on the landlord. And again, this is to remove incentives not to comply with important local housing laws.
Thank you.
Public Justice Center asked for a favorable report on this bill.
Thank you very much. Our next witness is Kayla Williams from Community Legal Services, Prince George's County. Kayla?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kayla Williams, and I am a supervising attorney with Community Legal Services of Prince George's County. Community Legal Services is a nonprofit service provider that provides representation to tenants in both Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County. We urge a favorable report on House Bill 174. CLS has represented more than 1,000 tenants in failure to pay rent cases at the District Court of Prince George's County, and I have personally witnessed the confusion a temporary license presents. The Court of Appeals in McDaniel versus Baranowski determined that a landlord who does not possess a current rental license is not entitled to utilize failure to pay rent proceedings if the property is located in a jurisdiction that requires a rental license. Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County both require that landlords obtain a rental license, and particularly in regards to Prince George's County, in order for a landlord to obtain a license, they must first pay a small fee to obtain a temporary license. Next, they must have the property inspected, and if the property passes inspection and is deemed safe, only then will a permanent license be issued. Possession of a temporary license does nothing to comply with the rationale of the McDaniel case because it does not ensure that a property will pass inspection. This bill simply ensures compliance with the McDaniel case and current licensing laws. For these reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, you have 30 seconds to spare. Thank you. Our next is Lisa Sorrow, Anne Arundel County Development Services.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is Lisa Sorrow. I'm General Counsel for Arundel Community Development Services. ACDS is the nonprofit housing and community development agency for Anne Arundel County. We provide the rental assistance program for the county, and we oversee the county's programs to provide safe and habitable housing for residents of the county. This bill is particularly important in Anne Arundel County because unlike the counties that you heard about previously, where it can take a long time for a failure to pay rent case to get to trial, in Anne Arundel County, our judges are very proud of the fact they follow the failure to pay rent statute to the letter. Cases in Anne Arundel County are routinely filed for hearings within 5 days of filing. So a tenant can be in court 5 days after their case was filed. If a judgment's entered against them 4 days later, the landlord can get a writ and have the eviction occur as soon as the sheriff can get to their property. That's not enough time for a tenant to develop a defense if the landlord is not licensed properly. If the landlord is required, however, to ensure that they provide proof of that licensing, the tenant will be able to see for certain whether that's a defense that's available to them or not, and they can move forward accordingly. There is not easy access to licenses in Anne Arundel County. I don't think in most counties it's available electronically. So if someone gets a notice on a Tuesday night for trial on Wednesday, there is no way they can prepare in time. That's just one nuts and bolts reason. You've heard a lot of other reasons to support this bill. We urge a favorable report on this, this bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Carissa, I can't forget you twice in a row, so it's good to see you again. Please, you are up.
Good to see you again. Thank you, Delegate, and thank you, members of the committee. Once again, yes, I am Carissa Hatfield with HPRP. I'm happy to be here in support of House Bill 174. I wanted to just take some time to make this testimony as short as possible and endorse the comments of my colleagues who have previously testified.
I do also want to add that one of the alarming trends that we're starting to see during the pandemic is that judgments are being entered against tenants who do not receive their notices in time. And what ends up happening is that landlords are going to court now, receiving a judgment for a property where they don't have a license and are required to do so. And tenants are facing eviction for properties where they never should be able to have been evicted from. I had cases, actually 2 weeks in a row, I had 2 different tenants who had this issue where a judgment was issued against them because they did not receive proper notice and had to come back to court to fight the fact that they were set for an eviction date. This should not be something a tenant should have to go through. They should not have to deal with the trauma of a potential eviction, a potential illegal eviction, may I add. And the courts should not have to be taking the time to backtrack and determine whether or not the landlord did the right thing and sent the notice to the proper place and actually has the rental license they're supposed to have. For the sake of judicial economy, for the sake of tenants, for the sake of everyone, it's more efficient for landlords to have to provide that proof up front and show the courts that they do in fact have the license that they're supposed to have from the beginning. For the reasons articulated by my colleagues and for the reasons that I've articulated today, HPRP endorses HB 174 and requests a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. From Maryland Legal Aid, Greg, are you up? No?
I'm actually up for this one.
There you
Thank
go. You guys got to remember to put your names in there so I know who I'm calling. Thank you.
I'm sorry about that. We'll do that next time. So yeah, hi, Harry Mont, staff attorney for Maryland Legal Aid. And Maryland Legal Aid represents low-income residents throughout the state. And I want to echo what everyone else has said, but I think just to add to it, you know, there is a burden asking a tenant to go to court, especially a tenant who is low income, who's paying 50% of his income to rent. And what we see happen, even for tenants who are familiar with the process, find out their landlord's not licensed and can get the case dismissed. I mean, they might win that day, but then the landlord files for the next month and the next month, and they have all these cases. And, you know, at a certain point, they're like, I can't go to court. If I keep going to court, I'm not gonna be able to pay rent. So they stop doing it. And that's a frequent occurrence. And it really allows landlords to take advantage of this failure to pay rent system and to be able to rent unsafe properties without any kind of consequences. And so I would just add that, and I would just urge you to support this bill for all the other reasons stated by my colleagues here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mont. Next, Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, Ruth Ann Norton.
Yes, Ruth Ann Norton, President and CEO of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. Thank you. The mission of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative is to advance the social determinants of health and racial equity through healthy housing. We were one of the co-creators of the lead risk reduction in housing law that has led to a 99% reduction in childhood lead poisoning in the state of Maryland, and have created some of the nation's foremost programs on creating healthy, sustainable, and climate-friendly housing. We are here to not repeat the expert testimony that you have gotten from all of the wonderful lawyers ahead of me. This is simply to say, as an organization that works with thousands of Maryland residents every year who face this burden in the court, that these measures put forth by Delegate Lehman are critical to affect the laws, not only for lead, but for healthy, sustainable housing to be put in place. This is needed, has long been needed, and I think has been laid out. We strongly urge the adoption and the favorable report on House Bill 174. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to repeat others' testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Aaron, I'm sorry, from Maryland Multi-Housing Association. Aaron.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Aaron Greenfield again. On behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association, you have our written testimony. We are favorable with amendments. I'd like to thank Delegate Lehman for including the electronic format proof of that in this year's version. But our two amendments quite specifically are on page 3, line 18, strike at the time of filing a written complaint under this subsection and insert at the hearing of the written complaint. We believe, and I believe the District Court of Maryland probably agrees, that the housing provider's burden should not be demonstrated before the clerk of the court, which is at the time of filing, but rather at the actual hearing before a judge. And I think that's an important distinction, and that demonstration of that burden ought to be before the judge and not before the clerk of the court. And then secondly, I have spoken to Delegate Lehman at length about the provisional or temporary license and certainly understand her concerns. However, due to technical issues, some jurisdictions may need to use a temporary or provisional license. In fact, in Baltimore, it is experiencing an inability to renew licenses currently. Prohibiting this form of license, whether it's an extension of the current license or temporary or provisional license, if it is so issued by a jurisdiction, would actually chill a housing provider's right to access the impartial justice system. So on page 3, we would urge striking lines 27 and 28 as well. On page 8, lines 3 through 5, strike beginning with the word A on line 3 through and including code on line 5. And for those reasons, we request a favorable report with those amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. The next witness is Catherine Howard from Regional Management Inc. Catherine.
Thank you very much.
There you are.
Hang on. Thank you very much. Kathy Howard, representing Regional Management Inc. We are a member of MMHA and certainly do completely agree with all of the points that Aaron has put forth. Just as a bird's eye view of what some of the particular issues that we're concerned about, the provisional, first of all, the idea of having to file additional paperwork at the beginning of the process of the failure to pay rent situation is going to add to the paper burden that the landlord and the clerk's office, as well as the sheriff's office, have to deal with, and that has not been something that anybody has decided up to this point is a rational, a good thing for us to do, since this is a paper-driven system. The second thing is that in Baltimore City, as a snapshot, their computer system in the Department of Housing and Community Development has been undergoing a very big sea change. It is not completed yet. In fact, attached to my written testimony, you have a notice from the DHCD telling landlords that they should not file for their 2022 licenses until March of 2022 in order to renew them or get them anew. And that would put us at the provision of this bill that says that a provisional license or some other type of license is not acceptable, would create an enormous problem under these circumstances. And I think that the bill needs to be, that part of the bill needs to be stricken so that there is the possibility of some flexibility for regions of the state that have both provisional licenses for a reason, and secondly, that it can accommodate situations like DHCD is currently experiencing, so that landlords are not deemed to be out of compliance with the law simply because there is a technical problem that they have no control over. So I would really urge that to be stricken from the bill, as Aaron's amendments do. So thank you very much. Take any questions. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Kathy. And last but certainly not least, Bill Castelli. Bill, there you are.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And although we were officially opposed to the bill, our position could be support with amendment. We've got our one concern with the bill is the provisional or temporary license. And just to illustrate this, I was talking with a Prince George's property manager who said even when they're renewing the license, oftentimes you will have a delay in the inspection. So you could potentially have a property that has been in compliance with the rental registration laws, passed every inspection for the last 5 years, but simply because there's a delay in inspecting the unit, as there was during the COVID emergencies, very few units were getting inspected. Then the landlord effectively has to give up their right to go to court when a non-payment situation occurs. So we do think this is an important issue. We know that right now in the industry that at least of folks that we've polled within our own membership, anywhere from about 3 to 20% of their portfolios have been sold off. Some of that is a reflection of the strong market. Some of it is situations where landlords weren't able to be paid. But the fact of the matter is, we think, particularly with landlords who have been doing the right thing, and it's just simply an administrative delay because an inspector wasn't able to get out to their property, that their right shouldn't be taken away from them. And for that reason, we would recommend that change to the bill.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Okay. We'll go to questions. I think Delegate Boyce is the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Standing Chair. I got a couple of questions. I think I'm going to start backwards, but I want to start with the sponsor, Delegate Lehman. Thank you for this bill. I think it's great. I do want to clarify a couple of things. Is it the intent of the bill? Because I'm hearing a couple of the support with amendment talking about essentially the additional paperwork for the clerk versus the judge to determine. Is it your intent that the landlord show it, but not necessarily file it in order to begin the proceedings?
Yes, thank you for the question, Delegate Boyce. That is the intent, and not make the clerk actually the arbiter of whether that license is valid or to, otherwise, pass judgment, but just to determine that the landlord does have a license in hand. I discussed this at length I had a very spirited conversation with Mr. Greenfield. I think he would agree, yes. And a few days ago, and I appreciate his ideas and input, but I also had a conversation about this with Mr. Shaw, if he's still on here, because he pulled the bill back out to reread it. We had discussed Mr. Greenfield's concerns as well as the concerns of the District Court of Maryland. So if he's still on here, I would welcome his insights.
I am here. So
you're on mute, Zephyr.
Sorry, the issue raised about the Baltimore City's technical problem, it kind of dovetails with a problem that I think many agencies experienced during the pandemic. And
yeah, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm strictly talking in like statewide in general, because
about the role of clerks, about the role of clerks
sure. In general, because I know, for instance, I'm sure we don't still in the city have our MDEC system, so everything is being done by paper. So I'm just trying to check in as it relates to a burdensome paper process. I'm hearing two things. So the clerk could essentially say, where's your license? They could potentially pull it up electronically, or they could potentially show the paper, and they say, okay, then that's it. And then it's like, okay, file. Or is there are we looking to actually copy it, have a copy of it to put with the paperwork for filing for any jurisdiction, whether or not they're electronic or paper or not? I think that's the question for me, because if it is a glance to be able to at least start the process, that is something that I certainly would support. If it's add the paper to, then, it sounds like either way, whether it's before the clerk and or in front of the judge, one starts the process or stops it, right, from even beginning, and the other one is just evidence in court for essentially the plaintiff to say, yes, I have my license, as it relates to the defendant, their person. So I'm trying to determine that before I go to my next question.
My understanding, Delegate Boyce, is that the word submit really is imagining simply the glance that you referenced. The landlord is already required to write down on the face of the form complaint that they have the rental license number. And the glance that you referenced would just confirm that that number is the number. I can't
Sure.
speak for Judge Morrissey, but I know that this has been a concern, and both Delegate Attar and Delegate Lehman in the past have, they've incorporated his feedback on this particular.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly want a landlord to show proof. It just seems like there's maybe a discrepancy between those two and the intent. But so I want to not get, I'll talk to you guys offline. I don't want to belabor point, but I want to go back to, I want to thank Ms. Kayla Williams for bringing up case law. And I wanted to dig into that just a little bit as it relates to, yes, you can't kind of file judgment without, documentation. But I think to the point of the provisional, because it's kind of a slippery slope. If I'm a good landlord and I'm just in the process and I'm stuck, what happens? But if also I'm a bad landlord, right? So I want to see if we can dig through the provisional a little bit more, in that not everybody has an electronic system. Some people do. Some would have a provisional and some don't even have a provisional. And how are we looking to manage that? Is it, could the provisional be something, if shown up, it could, in some cases, delay it still, because you don't necessarily have a license. Thank you for your provisional, your temporary, but in the other case, it could be also sufficient. So I do worry about that aspect, because it can go either way, good and bad. And so wondering how we can figure out how to clarify that a little bit more.
Sure. I think if I can answer your question, I think my concern with provisional licenses is the inspection issue. And there have been some bad instances, excuse me, there have been some instances where we have represented tenants and the landlord has presented a temporary license, but no inspection has taken place. And the tenant is, one case in particular, the tenant was actually told by the county that she had to leave despite her landlord filing a failure to pay rent case against her because the property was deemed uninhabitable. So that's, I guess, my primary concern with the temporary licenses being found sufficient. I will also say that the Prince George's County, they have issued guidelines stating that temporary licenses are insufficient to obtain a judgment. Of course, that's a different sector of the government, but I just would bring that to the committee's attention as well.
No, I appreciate that. And I'm wondering if it could be left up to the discretion of the judge in case we do have an issue where on the defendant's point, they can provide proof, evidence of lack of inspections or some other issues. Therefore, it's not then taken and then said, well, the place has been inspected. When I can provide proof, I can provide evidence that in fact it's not, and there are issues. So thank you.
Delegate Boyce, if I could also weigh in on that. So I would just point out, and I was a member of the Prince George's County Council for 8 years. I don't know the whole history behind provisional licenses, and this might be a little bit of semantics. I think when I talked to Mr. Greenfield, he sort of zeroed in on not the term provisional licenses so much, but the word that follows it, which says temporary. And in my mind, and this is maybe me, the English major, in my mind, those are two different things, although the bill talks about them as if they're synonymous. And the reason I say that is clearly Prince George's County, and I know this from being a lifelong resident, has been challenged for decades, and I do mean decades, with its licensing requirements for all kinds of things, not just rental housing. And in fact, the county exec I served with created a brand new agency just to deal with licensing and permits. And Mr. Castelli knows this very, very well. This is a long time challenge for the county. My theory is, I'm pretty sure, I will check into this, is that the county created this provisional system to get at a huge backlog in its system. And what I said in my testimony is the problem with the provisional license is it may never trigger an inspection. And someone may go from having a provisional license, and I believe this in fact does happen, to having a regular license without that inspection taking place. Only a fraction of residences are ever even inspected. And I talked about this with Mr. Greenfield about a horrific case in Langley Park that was profiled in the Washington Post, where literally the tenants could see through holes in the floor of their units down to the units below. I believe, like Delegate Stewart, that most landlords are good actors, but some are not. And so that's my concern around provisional licenses. And just one more comment. I do not agree, and I, like you, am not an attorney, and I don't know what exactly is going on in Baltimore City, but like you, I do not agree that this provisional license concern is the same as the concern that's been outlined here around expired licenses and this failure, whatever it is in Baltimore City. I don't know if it's an IT issue. I don't know if it's a staffing issue or whatever it is. I don't think it's the same thing. I don't think a license that's expired that landlords are told for now you can continue is the same thing as a provisional license, or would be viewed that way in a court of law. Again, not an attorney. Those are my instincts. And if any of the housing advocates would like to weigh in, I think Ms. Hatfield said she had a response to this.
I just want to be clear that I am not here advocating for landlords or for tenants per se, but I'm advocating a clear path to process so that there is a due process for the tenant in this case, but most importantly, there's also due process for the landlord if this is just something that falls through the cracks. So this is really about process and what is best from the time they start filing with the clerk, and to the point of the bill, it does say with the clerk that they would have to provide that information, which could also make it seem as though you don't have to provide that information maybe to the judge.
Yeah, thank you. And one more point. It was pointed out to me by, I believe, Mr. Shaw, that Baltimore City itself at one time had a provisional, a category of provisional licenses, and it has done away with that. So Baltimore City no longer issues provisional licenses. At least that is my understanding. And then, Mr. Chairman, is it okay for Ms. Hatfield to respond?
Sure, please.
Thank you. Just briefly, in regard to Ms. Howard raising the Baltimore City DHCD concerns, throughout the pandemic, when we as housing attorneys have made licensing requests to the department, there has been a provision at the bottom of the license stating that any licenses that expired after a certain date were considered valid until the file, actually till July of 2021. And they have advised property owners, we received this email as well that Ms. Howard is referencing, that these property owners received an email indicating that their licenses were extended due to this error. And we as housing advocates would never articulate or argue that those landlords do not have a license as a result of those administrative errors. So I do want to be clear that we have been following those recommendations of DHCD and being aware of that during the time period. And are not trying to advertise that those are properties that are not licensed.
Thank you. Very, very good to know. Thank you. Delegate Terraza.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so just to clarify, Ms. Hatfield, this wasn't my question, but you're saying those licenses that were extended are not provisional licenses?
Correct. They were extended by the Department of Housing and Community Development related to initially the pandemic, because there were safety concerns around inspections being conducted. And there were significant administrative delays during the pandemic since the Department of Housing and Community Development was, and as I understand still is, primarily working from home. So they did put, it was a full asterisk notation at the bottom of each licensing request made to them, stating that licenses that expired after, I believe, like March 15th of 2020 through July 31st of 2021 were extended due to the pandemic.
Okay, so that's okay, I gotcha. Thank you. Mr. Shaw, you said we were to Delegate Boyce's questions about this glance of the clerk or who is determining it. My understanding is in complaints, there's requirements all the time about what needs to be in a complaint. So it needs to be there's things that need to be in a complaint that gets filed with a clerk, but the clerk's office doesn't necessarily judge whether it's in there or not. The judge is still the person that would arbitrate, would decide or judge the sufficiency of a complaint. Is that?
That's an interesting question. There are examples where, for instance, debt collection cases must include the debt collector license. Civil cases in the circuit court must include an information sheet. There is a form that the court will send to a filing party, which is a civil filing error notice to alert the party that they did file something, was accepted, but on further inspection by the clerk, there's something else that's needed to perfect the filing. So this is not unprecedented that clerks could look at a filing that the party submits and ask for something more. On the other hand, I don't think it's necessary for this particular bill or this policy that we're discussing today, that happen, at the same time, that sort of inspection happen at the same time as the filing. These are filed in bulk. By and large, it's a little different animal than other filings because of the sheer quantity. And so I think those are the realities. And, it might sound strange coming from me, but those are the realities we've dealt with for several years with this iteration of bills. This is a terrain where I know, just like Ms. Howard and Mr. Greenfield know where the judiciary stands.
Right.
And it could be clearer. I'll say that it could be clear in this bill to specify what the role of the clerk is. And I think you do that if Judge Morrissey says you need to do that. But the real rubber hits the road at trial. That's the fundamental importance of this bill.
Right. Okay. And then the other question, just going back to something, I think it was you and Ms. Hatfield mentioned, this thing about chronic landlords who sort of chronically violate, whether they still don't have their lead certificate or whether they file things wrong, whatever it is. I can't even remember what you were talking about at this point, but I just want to confirm. So when you have these chronic violations by landlords, what they look like in the record, though, is chronic violations by tenants. Is that, Ms. Hatfield, is that what you, or either way, Ms. Hatfield, I just see you nodding your head.
Yeah. Yes, I apologize. My vigorous nodding often gets the better of me. Yes, this does reflect as an error on the part of the tenant and not on the part of the landlord. I've had clients who I've represented 4, 5, 6 times with an identical issue where the landlord is not licensed. The cases get dismissed at trial, but then that reflects poorly on the tenant's rental record, the tenant's future ability to rent another apartment, even though they're not the ones at fault for what happened. And then I have, for example, the 2 tenants I represented whose landlords got a judgment without a license. Those tenants then had to file court actions. They had to miss work in order to get it reversed. Right. And right now that can't be sealed, which is something else we've talked about today. And so if they try to move in the future, that's going to show up on their record that they had some kind of eviction filing against them and that a warrant was issued, that they were almost evicted. That's something a landlord could look up today. And so ultimately it doesn't do anything to any harm to the landlord to show that they're doing what they're supposed to do in regards to rental licensing, but it does harm the tenant if that doesn't happen.
Okay, well, that brings up all sorts of other questions I'll ask offline. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Terraza. Any more questions? Otherwise, I think that does it for bill hearings today. Okay, thank you very much. That does it for bill hearings. I know we want to go to announcements. I think that Delegate Healy has an announcement. Or is there any other announcements?
Delegate Healy's in rules.
Okay, I think she has subcommittee. Trish, did you text with her or anything about when she wants to have her subcommittee meet? No, going once, going twice. Any other announcements? Okay, I'm sure Delegate Healy will reach out directly to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Is that the sound of music?
And a fine job you did, Chairman Hell Doggo.
Thank you. I couldn't have done it without everybody else chiming in, making sure I didn't forget stuff. So thank you.
Did the hearing end?
45 seconds ago.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thanks. I have too many fires in the kitchen right now.
Right, you're right.
Okay, I'm going to end it then. Bye.